Good morning. As the committee convenes, I want to make it clear that I will not tolerate a disruption of the workings of this committee, and I will say that anyone who does will be arrested. Not ejected, but arrested. I want to make that very clear. We will not tolerate disruption of the workings of this committee. They are too important. The Senate Armed Services Committee meets this morning to receive testimony on the situation in Afghanistan. General Campbell, we thank you for appearing before the committee today, and we are grateful for your many years of distinguished services and your leadership of the United States and coalition forces in Afghanistan at this critical time. We ask that you convey the gratitude and appreciation of this committee to all of the brave men and women in uniform under your command. 14 years ago, U.S. forces went to Afghanistan because that was where, under the sanctuary under the Taliban regime, al-Qaeda planned and conducted initial training for the 9/11 attacks that killed 3,000 innocent civilians on American soil. Our mission was to ensure that Afghanistan would never again be a safe haven for al-Qaeda or other radical Islamist terrorists to attack us again. As General Petraeus told this committee recently, that mission has been successful for 14 years. American troops and civilians have made steady progress in supporting our Afghan partners to secure their country and dealt severe blows to al-Qaeda and other terrorist groups that want to attack the United States and our allies. At the same time, we have seen a remarkable progress in Afghan society. More schools and more teachers, greater opportunities for women and girls in the classroom, in the workforce, and in positions of leadership, higher literacy, better roads, and wider use of cell phones. Life expectancy in Afghanistan has increased by 22 years in less than a generation, a feat unparalleled in modern history. And it is precisely because we are fighting for progress and fighting for our values that it's been so disturbing to read reports alleging that some of our coalition partners may be engaged in sexual abuse and other activities that contradict our values. This committee treats such allegations with the utmost seriousness, and we look forward to hearing from you, General Campbell, as to what actions have been taken and what processes put in place to address this situation. Yes, we have made significant and steady progress in Afghanistan. But as U.S. military officials and diplomats have warned for years, I repeat, for years, these gains are still reversible, and a robust and adaptive U.S. troop presence based on conditions on the ground, not on a calendar, is essential to ensuring that these gains endure. Failure to adopt such a conditions-based plan, these experts have warned, would invite the same tragedy that has unfolded in Iraq since 2011. If we have learned anything from that nightmare, it is that wars do not end just because politicians say so. The evidence of that is already clear in Afghanistan. Since President Obama hailed the end of combat operations in Afghanistan last year, ISIL has arrived on the battlefield, and the Taliban have launched a major offensive to take territory across the country, as we saw most recently in the key city of Kunduz. Meanwhile, just like the Iraq security forces at the end of 2011, the Afghan National Security Forces are still developing key capabilities. The shortfalls are hauntingly familiar: intelligence, logistics, airlift, close air support, special forces, and institutional development. And yet the White House remains committed to its politically driven withdrawal of nearly all U.S. forces from Afghanistan. It's not too late for President Obama to abandon this dangerous course and adopt a plan for U.S. troop presence based on conditions on the ground. But time is of the essence, and continued delays by the White House are hurting our national security interest and those of our partners in Afghanistan and beyond. America's friends and foes alike are waiting on President Obama. The government and people of Afghanistan are waiting to see what kind of support and commitment the United States will make. Afghan security forces, whose morale has been tested by heavy casualties against the Taliban, are waiting to find out whether their American partners will remain at their side. Our NATO partners are waiting to determine their course in Afghanistan and need to begin generating forces now for an extended commitment. Pakistan is waiting for a U.S. decision while hedging its bets with individuals and groups that are hostile to our interests. The Taliban is waiting to see if it merely needs to wait until the United States draws down to an embassy-centric presence to have the battlefield largely to themselves. And then there are the thousands upon thousands of American troops and their families who have served and are serving in Afghanistan, who are waiting to see if their sacrifices will be put at greater risk because we abandoned Afghanistan by blindly following an inflexible timetable for withdrawal. As the world waits, the consequences of the indecision and the wrong decision are beginning to merge. Growing instability, terrorist safe havens, and an increase in direct threats to the United States. We cannot turn back the clock on decisions made 4 years ago in Iraq, but the decisions made now will determine the nature and scope of the future challenges we face in Afghanistan. The world walked away from Afghanistan once before, and it descended into chaos that contributed to the worst terrorist attack ever against our homeland. We cannot afford to repeat that mistake because the threats we face are real and the stakes are high for the lives of the Afghan people, especially women and girls, for the stability of the region, and for the national security of the United States. General Campbell, we thank you again for being with us this morning. We look forward to your testimony. Senator Reid.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and General Campbell, welcome, and thank you for your service. And please also pass along our deep appreciation to the men and women in uniform under your command in Afghanistan for their service. General, you have been in command for over a year of the twin missions in Afghanistan, training and advising the Afghan security forces and counterterrorism operations. Your purpose and mission is to ensure that Afghanistan does not once again become a safe haven for terrorists aiming to attack the United States, its allies, or their interests. Your testimony this morning comes at a critical time. The administration is in the process of considering options for the size and authorities of the U.S. military presence in Afghanistan in 2016 and beyond. I strongly believe that the U.S. force posture in Afghanistan going forward should be shaped and resourced to enable you, General, to achieve your mission's objectives based on conditions on the ground. We should also take into account our regional counterterrorism requirements, including against al-Qaeda and an apparent growing presence of ISIL, in determining the long-term size and posture of U.S. military presence in Afghanistan. The news reports regarding security conditions in Afghanistan indicate a worsening situation over the past few months. Taliban forces continue to be formidable despite the announcement of Mullah Omar's death. This year, casualties for the Afghan security forces have reached their highest level since the start of the conflict. The Taliban have expanded their control over some rural areas, closing schools, reducing the Afghan people's access to services, killing or intimidating government officials, reimposing restrictions on Afghan women and girls, and reversing the progress of the past decade in these areas. Taliban attacks in southern and eastern Afghanistan have increased, and most recently, they conducted a major operation to seize the provincial capital in Kunduz in the north. This situation raises significant concerns. Yet in 2015, Afghan security forces have repeatedly regrouped and retaken territory from the Taliban. It is notable that in the past few days, Afghan forces, with enabling assistance from U.S. and NATO advisors and airstrikes, have retaken central Kunduz from the Taliban. General Campbell, I hope you will give us your assessment of whether the Afghan Army and police retain their will and capability to fight. Security in Afghanistan depends not only on our training and advising the Afghan security forces, but also on whether those forces believe there is an Afghan government and leadership that they are willing to support and defend. In Iraq, we saw our training efforts catastrophically undermined when Prime Minister Maliki gutted the Army's leadership and replaced competent leaders with his own crony loyalists, resulting in an army that melted away when ISIL seized the city of Mosul and suffered a number of other significant losses. In Afghanistan, we have partners in President Ghani and CEO Abdullah. Yet this unity government has struggled to stand up its cabinet, and there are reports of serious divisions at lower levels. General, we would be interested in your views on President Ghani's commitment to ensuring that the Afghan Army and police have competent, non-corrupt leadership and any insights you may have on how to maintain and promote the unity of the Afghan government. Our counterterrorism operations in Afghanistan have had a number of significant successes this year. This is due in part to an increased level of cooperation across the Afghanistan-Pakistan border and active military operations by the Pakistan Army that have driven al-Qaeda and other militants across into Afghanistan, creating opportunities for targeting these extremists. I am concerned, however, that our ability to execute successfully these critical operations will be reduced as a result of resources being redirected to support our campaign against ISIL in Iraq and Syria, or a possible reduction in our counterterrorism footprint as part of the President's decision on the future size of U.S. forces in Afghanistan. I would also be interested in your thoughts on the operational authorities you believe will be necessary going forward to target terrorist groups that would hope to capitalize on U.S. and international troop reductions to once again use Afghanistan as a safe haven from which to launch attacks. Finally, our efforts to promote security in Afghanistan will be severely damaged if we are not perceived as upholding the highest standards for our forces and the Afghan forces that we train. Recent news reports alleging a policy of non-intervention when U.S. troops were aware of sexual abuse by Afghan commanders receiving training are deeply disturbing. General Campbell, I expect you to help this committee get to the truth regarding these allegations and to confirm for us that U.S. troops will not tolerate human rights abuses by forces we are training or advising, including the sexual abuse of any civilians. Additionally, U.S. forces must uphold the highest standards for the protection of civilians as they relate to collateral damage caused by military operations. The United States must do all it can to avoid incidents like the recent tragedy in Kunduz, where, according to news reports, U.S. airstrikes damaged a hospital run by Doctors Without Borders, killing more than 20 patients and staff and wounding more than 3 dozen. The Defense Department has announced that your headquarters will be conducting an investigation of this incident, and this committee expects to be kept informed of the progress of that investigation to the maximum extent appropriate as it goes forward. General Campbell, I am interested in hearing from you what additional steps are being taken to ensure that our rules of engagement reinforce the importance of protecting civilians from harm and preventing such tragic outcomes in the future. Thank you again, sir, for your service, and we look forward to your testimony.
Thank you very much, General.
Well, good morning, Chairman McCain, Ranking Member Reed, and distinguished members of the committee. I thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. I've been honored to lead and represent the servicemen and women of the United States Forces Afghanistan for the last 14 months. I'd like to begin by thanking the committee for your steadfast support of our soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, and our civilians. And due to your leadership and commitment, they're the best trained and equipped force our nation has ever deployed. Their outstanding performance bears testimony to your backing and the backing of the American people, so thank you very much. I'd like to pay tribute to our military families. They're the unsung heroes of the last 14 years of conflict. In many ways, our frequent absences from home are harder on them than they are on us. And without their love and support, we could not succeed. I'd also like to acknowledge and honor the over 2,200 servicemen and women who've been killed in Afghanistan and the over 20,000 who have been wounded. Tragically, we lost 14 personnel, to include 6 airmen and 4 contractors, U.S. contractors, last Friday in an aircraft mishap. And we always remember the Afghan and our own fallen and the loved ones they left behind. Every day we honor their memories by assisting the Afghans to build a stable and secure country and by protecting our homeland. Over 14 years have passed since the 9/11 attacks, and we haven't forgotten why we first came to Afghanistan and why we remain. Since 2001, the exceptional efforts and courage of our forces have ensured that another terrorist attack originating from Afghanistan and directed against the U.S. homeland has not occurred. 8 months have passed since I last appeared before this committee, and much has changed since then. Afghanistan, its government and security forces, the enemy, and our own coalition have undergone tremendous transitions. These changes have ensured that this fighting season has been fundamentally different. It can't be compared to previous years. I would like to emphasize how political, military, economic, and social transitions are affecting the operational environment in order to place our campaign in context. Afghanistan is at a critical juncture, and so is our campaign. But before I further explain the formidable challenges and the opportunities before us, I'd like to address a few topics that have been in the headlines here lately. First, I would like to discuss the tragic loss of lives in the strike on the hospital in Kunduz. By way of background, U.S. Special Operations Forces have been providing training, advice, and assistance to Afghan National Defense Forces who had been engaged in a tenacious fight with the Taliban. On Saturday morning, our forces provided close air support to Afghan forces at their request. To be clear, the decision to provide aerial fires was a U.S. decision made within the U.S. chain of command. A hospital was mistakenly struck. We would never intentionally target a protected medical facility. I must allow the investigation to take its course, and therefore I'm not at liberty to discuss further specifics at this time. However, I assure you that the investigation will be thorough, objective, and transparent. I would also like to remind the committee and the American people that we continue to make extraordinary efforts to protect civilians. No military in history has done more to avoid harming innocents. We've readily assumed greater risks to our own forces in order to protect non-combatants. To prevent any future incidents of this nature, I've directed the entire force to undergo in-depth training in order to review all of our operational authorities and rules of engagement. Our record stands in stark contrast to the actions of the Taliban. They've repeatedly violated the laws of war by intentionally targeting civilians. The United Nations attributes more than 70% of the non-combatants killed and wounded in this war to the Taliban. Second, I would like to discuss the sexual exploitation of children by a few members of the Afghan security forces. All of us consider this reprehensible. This criminal practice is entirely unacceptable, and it's unacceptable to the Afghans as well. President Ghani and Chief Executive Abdullah have reiterated their policies and laws to enforce this with their Afghan security forces. We'll do everything within our power to defend and protect human rights. That's our moral obligation to you, the American people, and ourselves. And I've ordered 100% training of the force to ensure that they understand our human rights policy, which has been in place since at least 2011. This policy requires that our personnel report any suspected human rights violations committed by the Afghan security forces, and this is to include any sexual abuse of children. Whenever and wherever our personnel observe human rights abuses, they will be conveyed through our chain of command and in turn to the Afghan government. Perpetrators must be held accountable. With still many weeks left in the traditional fighting season, intense combat continues in many parts of the country. The Afghan security forces have been severely tested this year, but they continue to fight hard. In the wake of the coalition's redeployment, the Afghan security forces and insurgents both accepted that this fighting season would be decisive. There was no winter lull, and since February, the fighting has been nearly continuous. Casualties on both sides have risen, and the violence has moved beyond the traditional insurgent strongholds. Pakistan military operations this year have also displaced foreign fighters into eastern and northern Afghanistan. The emergence of Daesh, or the Islamic State Khorasan Province, ISKP, has further complicated the theater landscape and potentially expanded the conflict. Most recently, the Taliban increased the tempo of their operations following the announced death of their spiritual leader, Mullah Omar. We're also now seeing how our redeployment and transition from combat operations to an advisory role have changed battlefield dynamics. Only a few years ago, our coalition numbered over 140,000 military personnel. Now our forces comprise of fewer than 14,000, of which approximately 10,000 are U.S. servicemen and women. In years past, our aircraft provided responsive and often decisive close air support to coalition and Afghan troops in contact. This is no longer the norm, but the exception. Collectively, the Afghan security forces are adapting to these changes, and in some places, they're struggling. Within this context, the fluidity of the current security situation is not surprising. This fighting season started well for the Afghan security forces as they executed successful multi-corps cross-pillar operations in Helmand, Zabul, and Ghazni provinces, and in the southern approaches into Kabul. In April, they fought back significant Taliban pressure in the north, and in August and September, they reversed almost all of the Taliban gains in the northern Helmand after considerable effort. Yet there have been setbacks, and most recently, the Taliban overran Kunduz City. Still, the Afghan security forces rallied and they've regained control of most of the cities, just as they've successfully retaken other ground temporarily lost throughout this fighting season. The Afghan security forces' inconsistent performance in Kunduz underscores several of their shortcomings. They must improve their intelligence fusion, command and control, utilization of their forces. They don't possess the necessary combat power and numbers to protect every part of the country. This makes it very difficult for the Afghan security forces to counter the Taliban's ability to temporarily mass, seize an objective, and then blend back into the population. Ultimately, the Afghan security leaders need to discern better when to fight, when to hold, and where to assume risk. Despite these shortcomings, however, the Afghan security forces have displayed courage and resilience. They're still holding. The Afghan government retains control of Kabul, Highway 1, its provincial capitals, and nearly all the district centers. The Afghan security forces are effectively protecting the principal population centers. It's also apparent that our advisory support and financial backing are strengthening the resolve and building their systems and processes. The Afghan security forces have repeatedly shown that without key enablers and competent operational level commanders, they cannot handle the fight alone in this stage of their development. Ultimately, I'm convinced that the improved leadership and accountability will address most of their deficiencies, but it will take time for them to build their human capital. The Afghan security forces' uneven performance in this fighting season also underscores that their shortfalls will persist well beyond this year. Capability gaps still exist in the fixed and rotary wing aviation, combined arms, intelligence, and maintenance. One of the greatest tactical challenges for the Afghan security forces have been overcoming the Afghan Air Force's still extremely limited organic close air support capability. Despite the myriad of challenges, the fundamental partnership between the coalition and the Afghan government remains durable. The difference between the Ghani administration and the previous administration is like night and day. At every level, coalition and Afghan leaders continue to work together in pursuit of shared objectives. The Afghan government, civil leaders, and military commanders demonstrate a growing appreciation for the coalition's efforts. President Ghani has asked NATO and the U.S. to provide some flexibility in our planning to account for the fact that his government remains in transition while the threats he's facing are changing. He's asserted that a sustained coalition and U.S. presence provides actual and psychological stability to the country as the new government solidifies. He recognizes that his new administration must invest considerable time and effort to address the challenges of systemic corruption. He has also acknowledged that while the Afghan security forces are better equipped and trained than ever, much work remains to build their systems and processes and improve their leader development. I've offered my chain of command several options for our future laydown in 2016 and beyond. It was envisioned in mid-2014 that we would transition to a normalized embassy presence by January 2017. That remains our planning assumption. Since that time, much has changed. We've seen the rise of Daesh, an increased al-Qaeda presence in Afghanistan due to pack mill operations, and now we have strong partners in President Ghani and Chief Executive Abdullah. As a result, I've put forward recommendations to adjust this new environment while addressing our core missions: train, advise, and assist the Afghan security forces and conduct counterterrorism operations to protect the homeland. As the upsurge in insurgent violence in the northern Helmand and Kunduz shows, Afghanistan is again at a decisive point. The President is well aware of the tenuous security situation, and I also appreciate that he has many other global issues to weigh as he considers my recommendations. My role is to provide him my best military advice based upon my assessment of the conditions on the ground, weighed against the risks, both to the force and to the mission. I'm unable to discuss further details on the options as I've provided to the President. In the past, when flexibility has been requested of him, he took it under serious consideration and made his decision. He provided flexibility this year. The same decision process is being worked through now for 2016 and beyond. In closing, the challenges before us are still significant. An extremely tough fight the Afghan security forces continue to hold. They've remained resilient, and they haven't fractured. Fully supported and led by an engaged Commander-in-Chief, President Ghani, embraced by the Afghan people, and backstopped by our military advisors, resources, and enablers, the Afghan security forces' future and Afghanistan's prospects for eventual peace still remain promising. If we fail in this worthwhile mission, Afghanistan will once again become a sanctuary for al-Qaeda and other terrorists bent on attacking our interests and citizens abroad and at home. If a security vacuum arose, other extremist networks such as Daesh would also rapidly expand and sow unrest through Central and South Asia and potentially target our homeland. The hard work and the sacrifices of countless coalition military personnel and civilians over the last 14 years have created the conditions in which the Afghans can and are now taking responsibility for their own security and governance. The Afghans welcome the opportunity to shape their destiny, but they still desire, need, and deserve our assistance. Our support cannot and should not be indefinite or unconditional. The Afghans must continue to do their part. If they do, we should continue to exercise strategic patience and sustain our commitment to them. Working together, we can be successful. A proactive, cooperative Ghani administration and a committed Afghan security forces offer us a unique opportunity to further develop a meaningful strategic relationship in a volatile but vital area of the world. Our continued efforts to stabilize Afghanistan will benefit the entire region and in turn offer greater security for the U.S. homeland and Americans abroad and at home. Again, thank you for your steadfast support of our campaign. I look forward to your questions. I also request the committee to accept my written statement for the record. Thank you very much, sir.
Without objection, thank you, General Campbell, and thank you for your continued great leadership in a very difficult situation, and we are proud of your great leadership. On the hospital issue, and I know I speak for all members of the committee that our sympathy for those who were killed and injured in this tragedy is heartfelt and deep. Is it true that the strike was requested by Afghan forces on the ground that struck the hospital?
Sir, as I said yesterday in a press statement, yes, sir, that Afghan forces on the ground requested aerial support from our forces that are on the ground. But as I said in my opening statement, even though the Afghans request that support, it still has to go through a rigorous U.S. procedure to enable fires to go on the ground.
But there was no forward air controllers, American forward air controllers on the ground.
Sir, we had a special operations unit that was in close vicinity that was talking to the aircraft to deliver those fires.
Thank you. General Campbell, the President on 27 May 2014 made a long statement, said by the end of 2016, our military will draw down to a normal embassy presence in Kabul with a security assistance component, and I'm not making this up, as he said, just as we've done in Iraq. General, in your opinion, do the conditions on the ground warrant a change to the current plan for the drawdown of U.S. troops in Afghanistan?
Sir, thanks for the question. Sir, as I mentioned in my opening statement, when that decision was made in 2014, a lot has happened since then in transition. The growth of Daesh, the growth of, we didn't have a national unity government in 2014, the actions by Pakistan and the fight they've had to push additional insurgents inside of Afghanistan. Underneath that construct, it does not enable us to provide a CT component. And so as I've talked about on the options, I provided several options to the chain of command and will continue to work with my chain of command, provide them my best military advice, the pros and cons of each of those courses of action as we move forward.
Well, could I respectfully ask again, do the conditions on the ground warrant a change to the current plan that calls for, by the end of 2016, we'd be an embassy-centric force?
So again, based on conditions on the ground, based on the transitions I've talked about, I do believe that we have to provide our senior leadership options different than the current plan that we're going with. Absolutely. The current plan as envisioned right now, sir, as you know, and as you talked about in your opening statement, is embassy-based presence. As I take a look at conditions on the ground, as we have to continue to provide TAA to our Afghan partners, when the President made that decision, it did not take into account the change over the last 2 years. And so the courses of actions that I have provided to my senior leadership provide options to adjust that.
Did the attack on Kunduz surprise? Maybe the word isn't surprise, but isn't it an indication that the Taliban have significant strength, including in an area in the north where they, generally speaking, did not have very much capability, thanks to the makeup there in northern Afghanistan?
So the Afghans and, quite frankly, coalition were surprised when the Taliban were able to take over Kunduz City. A lot of reasons, I think, why, that the Afghans are taking a hard look as well to make sure they understand and do their own sort of after action on this. Part of the reason they didn't have many of the key leaders in place. The city, for the most part, had police. The Afghan army was on the outskirts. They did not reinforce. Bottom line, the Taliban were able to come in, attack from within the city, and, quite frankly, surprised the police forces that enabled the Taliban to gain a great I.O. victory. I don't think the Taliban had intent to stay in Kunduz for very long. As soon as the Afghan forces were able to bring additional forces in, logistically resupply that, the Taliban, for the most part, melted away, left the city. There are small, isolated pockets that they continue to fight for.
From a PR standpoint, though, it was a rather significant victory for the Taliban.
Sir, absolutely, yes.
Finally, you said in your testimony, we'll need to help the Afghans address capability gaps in aviation, intelligence, and special operations, and I'd add logistics to that list. Shouldn't it be that you should be recommending not numbers of people to the White House, but capabilities, and then fill in the numbers after that? Is that the process you're using, or is it you're just giving them numbers?
So I deal in capabilities, as you talk about. So I look at the requirement and really the needs assessment that the Afghans would have, and try to base the courses of action based on those requirements.
So their needs are aviation, intelligence, and special operations, according to your testimony?
Sure, absolutely. Sustainment, logistics, the aviation piece, we just, quite frankly, started late on their Air Force, building their close air support capability. Logistics and sustainment is hard for any Army. For a U.S. Army that's been around for 240 years, try to compare that to an Afghan Army that's nascent and maybe only 8 to 9 years old, it is quite tough.
And aviation is one of the areas of most critical, I would argue. I think they have 2 helicopters, is that right?
So they have 2 functioning Mi-35 helicopters. They have several Mi-17s, and now they have the MD-530, which we introduced here. But as far as close air support helicopters, that is a key gap. As you know, sure, it takes 2 or 3 years to grow a pilot, 2 or 3 years to grow maintainers. We're doing that as fast as we can. They started out the season with 5 Mi-35s. Today they have 2, just based on airframe flyability.
Well, I thank you. And again, General, I would like to, again, express my appreciation for the outstanding job you're doing under extremely difficult constraints. I thank you, General. Senator Reid.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. And thank you, General, for your testimony and for your service. So this has been a long struggle, and every community in this country has seen the effects. And just recently, a brave young Rhode Islander, Sergeant First Class Andrew McKenna, was killed in action in Campbell. So this is not just academic or hypothetical. This is very real for our country and for the the men and women of this country and our armed services. Let me ask you a question. You have two major missions, train and equip, together with counterterrorism operations. Just in the context of counterterrorism operations, do you need a physical presence outside of Kabul to do that effectively?
So to conduct counterterror operations effectively, it would have to be outside of Kabul, yes, sir.
So that would argue in terms of capabilities for a presence that is beyond the simple environs of Kabul.
Yes, sir.
All right. There is new leadership in the Taliban. Mullah Mansour is taking control. His deputies include, I think, one principal of the Haqqani network, which is located on both sides of the border with Afghanistan and Pakistan. And all of this raises the issue of the role of Pakistan, which is consistent and a constant issue that comes up. Just a few months ago, they were trying to broker peace talks. Can you give us some insights into the current position of the Pakistan government with respect to what's going on in your AO?
Sir, again, as far as reconciliation and Pakistan's role, Afghanistan has said many times that this has to be Afghan-led on reconciliation. I think Pakistan understands that. President Ghani and the leadership inside of Pakistan have talked several times about reconciliation moving forward. I think both President Ghani and Pakistan understand that there has to be some sort of political resolution to this fight. And so reconciliation is one of those ways. Right now, with the Taliban being fractured, with Mansour claiming that he is ahead with other folks like Zakir, Manan, Yaqub, Dadullah, other senior Taliban members are actually still trying to struggle to fight against that and don't believe that Mansour should be the head. I think that will work itself out, but I think there's opportunities for Afghanistan to take advantage of that as they move forward. There was, as everybody I think has been mentioned here, that there was one peace talk. There was a second one that was on the table that was moving forward, and just a day or so before is when the Mullah Omar death was announced, and they kind of scrapped that. I do believe, and I did have the opportunity to talk to General Raheel Sharif, the Pakistan Chief of the Army. I talk to him probably once a week. I try to get to Pakistan once a month. I did talk to him last Monday, and he's dedicated trying to move the peace process back, and I know that he and President Ghani will continue to try to work through that. But again, sir, I think that's going to take time and a lot of effort by a lot of people, and I don't think that we should expect that it's going to happen here in the near future, but that will take concerted effort by all.
As you indicated in your testimony, that both President Ghani and CEO Abdullah seem to be committed to not only a positive relationship with the United States, but to create a professional military force. Is that, again, your consensus? And also, unlike, hopefully, Iraq, there does not appear to be any major sectarian divisions developing within the security force?
Sir, you're right. I mean, I do believe that the Afghan security forces continue to be very resilient, that President Ghani has taken on the role as commander-in-chief. He takes that very seriously. He visits training. He talks to his corps commanders quite frequently in person, on video teleconferences. So he takes on that role. And I have seen the Afghan security forces under very, very tough situations continue to come together. I do not see, and I spent about 19 months in Iraq, I do not see the same decisive ethnic infighting that I saw in Iraq. You know, they have had some setbacks. We knew this was going to be a very tough season, and both the Afghan security forces and the Taliban knew this would be a decisive fighting season. And I think over time they continue to get better. So in northern Helmand, where they had some issues, Musa Qala was taken over. It took a little bit of time, but the Afghan forces, although some of those had retreated out, the majority got back together, had a good plan, resupply to move the right forces in to take back over Musa Qala. They did the same thing in Kunduz. And again, very hard to move that number of forces logistically, to plan that very quickly. And that's, you know, so if you try to compare Iraq and Afghanistan, I see them as again, night and day, two different things. Afghans are fighters, and sure, they're warriors.
So both, from your perspective, operationally and politically, the Afghans are making a commitment that justifies continued support by the United States and NATO.
Sir, without a doubt, absolutely, yes, sir.
Thank you.
Could I mention the chart there, General, is the shaded areas, are the areas of Taliban activity. Is that an accurate chart in your view, right over sun?
Sorry, I got one right here. Sir, if the red areas are active areas of Taliban,
Is it
I
generally?
think most part that is on target.
Thank you. Senator Inhofe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You've answered really most of my questions. Let me just ask for clarification. When Ghani last January and then again last week reemphasized that we may want to re-examine our withdrawal plan, I think, as I understand it, you have a list of options that you are prepared to give the administration to look at. Is that what you're referring to?
So President Ghani has asked on different occasions to continue to have coalition forces. I have already provided my recommendations for a force posture post-2016. Yes, sir.
Yeah, and you're not in a position to share any of that.
Say again, sir.
You're not in a position to share any of that with this committee at this time.
Sir, as I said in my opening statement, I provided those to the leadership. You know, I have to be able to give my leadership the opportunity to make those decisions without.
In February, when you were before this committee, you outlined 6 criteria, 6 expectations. I wouldn't expect you to have those in front of you right now, but can you recall any of those 6 that have not met your expectations? And then, for the records, kind of outline each one of them and how they're coming on this on that score sheet.
Sir, like you, sir, I don't remember those 6, but certainly if I could take that for the record and we'll reply back to you. Yes, sir.
That would be fine. In our last hearing, you stated the Afghan Army and National Police have shown that they can win battles on their own, overmatching insurgents wherever and whenever it's a challenge. You also estimated that it would be unlikely that Taliban would be able to overmatch them on the battlefield in 2015. How has that estimate changed, or has it?
Sure, I think, again, that this fighting season we knew was going to be very, very tough. I still believe that the Taliban cannot overtake the government. They will not overthrow the Afghan government. They will continue to challenge the Afghan security forces as the Afghan security forces continue to grow. They've stretched the Afghan security forces. As you look at the map that Senator McCain referred to, those areas up in the north or some areas up in Badakhshan and in the far northeast, Faryab, Kunduz, are areas in the past that we had not seen as much insurgent activity. But again, all the enemy has to do is go in and cause terror, fear, and then come back out. May not try to occupy or control, but they're really trying to stretch, I think, the Afghan security forces. Their main goal continues, I believe, to be Helmand, Kandahar, the heartland of the Taliban. And so as they pull forces from maybe the south or east to the north, it could make the Afghan security forces vulnerable. In the south, the Afghan security forces understand this. They have a campaign plan for this fighting season. They have a campaign plan of what they want to do during the winter in preparation for the next fighting season. So I think they understand this and continue to work to try to improve.
You know, I and probably every member of this committee have been over there and have observed the advancements that are made by the Afghans, and I think they're real. But Senator Reid, in his opening statement, said something about the will to fight. Has there been a deterioration in the will to fight on their behalf?
So we've seen on 2 occasions here in Kunduz with the police and probably northern Helmand with the police that you had some members lose that will. They're taking a hard look on why that happened, whether it was poor leadership, which I believe was a big part of that, whether they'd just been in the fight too long and not been able to rotate. Again, that's probably 2 battalions worth out of 100+ battalions. For the most part, I see the Afghans continue to have the will to fight. And the places, as we've looked at, that have come out, a lot of those have been actually police that were untrained police, that were hired, had not gone through the requisite training, had been put out very hastily out onto checkpoints that may not have been supported by other forces. And when they took fire, they felt they may not have been supported, and they left. So, but that is not the majority of the Afghan. It's far from the majority of the Afghan forces. And I think they continue to learn from that, and they've made adjustments.
Right. Thank you, General. And then lastly, you did already address the the abusive behavior or the accusations over there. But the press reports also that they said, quote, are happening also on our basis. You didn't say anything about our basis. Is there anything that you'd share with us as to whether or not the accuracy of that accusation?
So again, I think that, the thing that started this piece was a media article, and it was citing cases from 2010, 2011, and 2012. I've reiterated my policy in writing to all of my folks. I have not seen anything on our basis, sir. Absolutely not.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Senator Kane.
Thank you, Mr. Sayer, and thank you, General. I want to dig into a piece of your testimony just to make sure we're all kind of on the page you're on. You talk about we all knew this fighting season would be tough. Talk about why this fighting season, was particularly challenging.
So we knew this was going to be tough again because this was really the first year that the Afghans are going to be totally on their own.
And so the Taliban would want to test that early.
Sure, absolutely. The Taliban knew that as well. And they also knew if there was going to be some sort of reconciliation in the end, they wanted to operate from a position of strength. To get a position of strength, they got to fight. They got to go out and cause disruption with the Afghan security forces. So I think everybody knew this was going to be the Afghans certainly knew this was going to be very tough. They tried to get out in front of this by conducting a multi-corps operation early on in the February timeframe. So they actually started the fighting season, the Afghan security forces did, as opposed to waiting till the Taliban brought it on. There's usually about an April to October fighting season that people talk about. This year, as I said, there really was no lull, and that it was a continuous fight. And the Afghans a lot of times take the winter time frame to regroup, to do additional training. They did not have that opportunity this time.
They would love not only to be militarily successful in this fighting season, this first, but they would love to destabilize the civilian government if they could, if at all possible.
The Taliban, yes, sir.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Talk a little bit about the Taliban post-Mullah Omar. We talked a bit about this in my office yesterday, sort of internal divisions and factions. We've also heard claimed ISIL affiliations in Afghanistan, but a lot of the reports have suggested that may be Talibanis who are not happy with their leadership, and so they're claiming an affiliation with ISIL. Who is the Taliban today? Talk about that a bit.
Sure, thanks. So again, the Taliban under Mullah Omar had a spiritual leader. He'd been there for years and years. Whether they, and they did not see him for many years. And in fact, for the last 2.5 years, there's been a big lie out there that he'd been passing on guidance. And many of the Taliban, I believe, now feel that they trusted somebody that wasn't there. And so they're disenfranchised. They want to do something about it. And so they're fighting back against Mansour because they knew Mansour was the guy that had something to do with this. So there are fractures within the Taliban. Mansour, Yaqub, Manan, many other ones in there, Dadullah, and they're trying to take control of a piece of it. The Taliban are very decentralized, and so they do operations that are very decentralized. But Mansour is trying to get a coalescent group there. He has named, I think, as Senator McCain talked about early on, and Senator Reid, that he has named Siraj Haqqani as one of his deputies. He has Zawahiri from AQ has come out and said, I pledge allegiance to the Taliban as well. So there seems to be some steam over the Omar piece to try to coalesce and get a group. But they have their own issues with funding, with being able to work together, leadership issues. Up in mostly in Nangarhar in the east, as we've seen a rise of Daesh or ISIL KP. It's been reported in a lot of different provinces, Saripul, Helmand, but Nangarhar is where ISIS or the Daesh have predominantly been. And that's where they want to set up and use Jalalabad as their capital of Khorasan province. And they want to try to recruit and they want to expand. The issue right now is that the Taliban and Daesh continue to fight each other. And so they're going at it inside of there. A lot of the Daesh, as we see, continue to be disenfranchised Taliban that maybe see Daesh as a way to gain more media, more resources. So they kind of change T-shirts, raise a different flag. You see a lot of TTP that are Pakistani Taliban that have gone over to the Daesh side as well. So we continue to look at that. When I was here in February, I think I called it nascent. The term I would use today would be operationally emergent, and as they continue to try to build upon their capacity. President Ghani looks at that. I look at it every day as we move forward.
Let me ask you about one more topic. You were, prior to this assignment, you were Vice Chief of Staff of the Army, and one of your responsibilities was readiness. We're having an intense budgetary discussion here. How many of our military strategies around the globe are limited because of readiness deficits in the current budget environment?
Sir, all of the forces that I get in Afghanistan have the requisite training, and they've gone through all of that. So I have not suffered that in Afghanistan. I do know that with all the services, they continue to have issues as we look toward the sequestration. And I think over time, they've been able to balance that based on priorities to provide Afghanistan the requisite forces with the right training. But as the budget will continue to have issues, hopefully that will not impact Afghanistan, but it certainly could as we move forward, sir.
General, I appreciate your testimony as much as I agree with members of the committee that our strategy in Afghanistan should be conditions-based, not calendar-based. I hope we'll have a budget that is conditions-based, not calendar-based to a decision that was made in August of 2011. We should be making budgetary decisions based upon the needs of today. And with that, Mr. Chair, thank you.
I agree. Senator Cotton.
Thank you. General Campbell, thank you very much for your service to our country, and thank you for the service you represent of the many American men and women you have in theater with you. I want to start with the Kunduz hospital bombing. So I understand that an American aircraft and American ground troops were involved in calling for fire that ultimately hit that hospital.
So we have U.S. Special Forces on the ground. They're doing train, advise, assist with our Afghan partners. Our Afghan partners called for fire. A U.S. aircraft delivered those munitions, yes, sir.
And there are 3 investigations underway?
Sir, I have a DOD investigation, there's a NATO investigation, and the Afghans are doing an investigation, and will be open and transparent. I've talked to the investigating officers, Brigadier General Rich Kim. He's up in Kunduz today. I talked to him this morning. He's reaching out to all the folks that were involved there. He's reaching out to Doctors with Borders to make sure that we have everything we can on this investigation as we move forward.
And you conduct investigations like this anytime there's a similar incident?
So we have to get to the facts. There's a lot of questions out here, and yes, sir.
Do you think there's anyone who regrets this incident more than the pilots of that aircraft?
So I think everybody wants to make sure that we find out what happened, and as you know, every soldier, sailor, airman, Marine, if they're involved in something like this, that hurts.
Is there anyone at root to blame for this incident other than the Taliban for going into a civilian area and fighting among civilian targets?
So the investigation will tell me as I get the facts on that. But as you mentioned, the Taliban did go into Kunduz. The Taliban did know that they were going to cause a fight inside a built-up area. And as I talked about, the Taliban causes, based on the UN, over 70%, I believe it's a little bit more, of they target civilians. Difference between target civilians and then what happened at the hospital.
The Taliban, like our enemies in Iraq, like Hezbollah in Lebanon and Hamas in Gaza, intentionally target civilians and intentionally use civilians as shields. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
I want to talk briefly about some of the stories about abuse of children among certain Afghan leaders. So you're a 4-star general at the highest level of command in Afghanistan. I served there 6 years ago as a captain. There's a big gap between those 2 levels, and sometimes we see things differently. I received training before I went, as did my soldiers, and in Afghanistan I received training. I provided training that said that such behavior was unacceptable, nor did I ever see such behavior. Is that still the case today, training for those soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marine throughout the country?
So that is correct. The Afghans have also incorporated this into their training, human rights training, into the basic training courses, into their officer accession training. They've incorporated this. They've also trained their JAGs or their lawyers to be able to perform what we call mobile training teams to go out to the different corps to reemphasize the human rights training throughout. President Ghani has stated emphatically, that this is that he will prosecute anyone suspected of committing sexual assault upon children. So, as I said in my opening statement, we have looked at this very hard, and at least since 2011, I know that there's always been a policy out there that says you will report violation of human rights. And I reiterated that in writing here recently based on the media reports. And I've also required that within 30 days, all personnel in theater complete additional training on human rights abuse reporting requirements, and then everybody new coming into theater complete training upon their arrival into theater to make sure that we get everybody there. And the training very clearly indicates that sexual abuse by Afghan security forces is a human rights abuse issue.
Well, thank you. You said back to 2011. I can tell you that at least in my neck of the woods in Afghanistan, it went back to at least 2008. I suspect it went back to 2001 as well. I'd like to turn to your testimony about the differences in this fighting season from previous fighting seasons. You cited the rise of the Islamic State, the National Unity Government, Pakistan military operations there, in fact, in eastern and northern Afghanistan. But there's also the difference of our presence in the country. Your testimony on page 3 states, in years past, our aircraft provided responsive and often decisive close air support to coalition and Afghan troops in contact. This is no longer the norm, but the exception. Our force reduction, drop in enablers, and resultant close air support gap have created challenges for the ANSAF, and they have understandably struggled at times to adjust. It sounds to me like, General, that our unwise and precipitous drawdown in Afghanistan over the last couple of years have contributed as much to the difficulty in the fighting season this year as anything that we've seen from enemy activity.
Sure. What I would say is that we knew that we would have to continue to do train, advise, and assist in many areas, as we talked about: logistics, intelligence, special operating forces. Close air support is the one that I get asked about from the Afghans every single day. It is an area that we started too late. We're continuing to work that very hard. We're surging on building their pilots, building their maintainers. But as I put in my statement there, it's been slow coming. So what we've really worked with the Afghans is to enable them in every other way to try to work through this with using their own QRFs, using every indirect fire means that they have. And so it's a balance of making sure that they can work through that. Again, the Taliban don't have close support helicopters. The Taliban don't have up-armored Humvees. The Taliban don't have a lot of the sophisticated technical equipment that we have provided to the Afghans over the years. I go back to leadership, and leadership makes a difference. And in areas that they have had problems, I think leadership has been the key. But we have to be able to provide the Afghans with this ability to provide their own close air support, and that's going to take several more years to get there. If they would have had their own close air support at levels that they probably wanted, maybe something like Helmand may not have happened there. But, as we go through and look at that, it's going to be, they're very committed to working through this piece of it, and they've made many adjustments as they go forward.
Thank you. You had said in response to Senator McCain that you deal in capabilities, not personnel numbers. I hope the President does as well.
Senator Shaheen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and General Campbell, thank you for being here this morning and for your service. Thank you also for your forthrightness in talking about what happened with the bombing of the hospital in Kunduz. I know all of us looked at that horrific accident and want to know how that could happen. And I appreciate your talking about the effort to investigate on our part what happened there, but do you have any reason to object to having an independent investigation done by the UN or another independent body of what happened?
Ma'am, I have trust and confidence in the folks that will do the investigation for NATO, the folks that will do the investigation for DOD, and in the Afghan partners. And so, all the very, very tough questions that we're all asking, they will get after that. My investigating officer, again, is a Brigadier General Rich Kim. I have all the trust and confidence that he will get answers to all of those questions, and he'll continue to work that very hard, and will continue to be transparent and provide all of that to this committee and to the American people as we move forward.
But as I understand your answer, then you would not object to and would cooperate with an independent body other than NATO or our Department of Defense in doing that kind of an investigation?
I would let my higher headquarters or senior personnel make that decision. We are reaching out again to Doctors Without Borders and the personnel that were on site, making sure that we get all sides of the story. I did talk again to the investigating officer this morning. He has done that. He's talked to a few. He's continuing to try to get out to locations where he can talk to doctors, nurses, survivors of that, to make sure he gets all that story, and we'll certainly share all of that.
Thank you. There was a very interesting recent news article about the role that Afghan-trained special forces units played in regaining control of Kunduz and the role that female soldiers who were part of those units played. I wonder if you could share with us what you know about how those women who are trained to serve in the Afghan Army are faring and the role that they're playing in the successes that they're seeing on the ground.
Thank you for the question, ma'am. I do believe that having the ability to have Afghan females embedded in the special operating units provide them a unique capability as they get on objectives to talk to females that are on those objectives. They use this quite frequently. Female engagement teams is what we used to call it. I think they call it the same thing. So that's been quite helpful to their National Mission Force, which is their equivalent of our Rangers, the Katejas. They have some of these females also inside of their commando units, so this is quite good. The MOI, the Ministry of Interior, with the police continues to do better and better on recruiting females as police, and the police can continue to come in and probably operate in their own hometowns. It's a little bit more difficult for the Army to recruit females because most of them would have to come in and then deploy someplace throughout the country. So the MOD is a little bit farther behind, but we continue to work it very hard. This committee has earmarked money for us on gender integration that we work toward recruiting methods. I have a gender integration advisor that reports directly to me that works with Ms. Ghani, that works with all the folks in Afghanistan to continue to look at how we can do better building this capacity. It has been slow. Culturally, it is hard, but I think both President Ghani and Dr. Dula really want to get after this.
Well, I know that most people on this committee have talked about the importance of ensuring that women continue to have a place in Afghan society that gives them opportunities, and so this is one of the ways in which we can see women advance that I think will have a trickle-down effect across other sectors. So I appreciate the efforts that you've undertaken. I also want to thank you for supporting the Special Immigrant Visa Program for those in Afghanistan who have helped our troops. As you may be aware, the Defense Authorization Act this year includes an additional 3,000 Afghan SIVs, and maybe you could just speak briefly to how important that is in terms of our dealings with Afghans and getting them to help us.
Ma'am, I think, as you know, we've been dependent on some great Afghans over the years to provide interpreter translation skill sets for us that we didn't have. They put their life on the line with tactical units. They've done it for many, many years, over and over. They put themselves at risk and their families at risk, and I think anything that we can do to help mitigate the impact on them and the safety of them and their families is greatly appreciated. I know that I get asked all the time about that. They work that through our embassy. Our embassy has a great program under Ambassador McKinley to work through that.
Thank you very much.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, General Campbell, for your service to the country and your leadership. I wanted to ask you about, right now, the administration's stated policy in Afghanistan, as reiterated when President Ghani visited our country in March, is that we will be drawing down to a normal embassy presence in Kabul with security assistance, just as we've done in Iraq, and by the end of 2016. If that remains our policy, in light of the capability gaps that you've identified in your testimony and have been identified many times before this committee, what will be the consequences of that in Afghanistan?
Ma'am, if we go to a normal embassy presence, as you stated there, we would have very limited train and advise assist capability from Kabul.
And what do you think will happen to Afghanistan? And what do you, if we do that?
Well, it'll take much longer to continue to train in some of those critical areas that we need to train. So it would be very difficult, again, to do train, advise, assist.
So would we lose, I mean, would the Taliban gain territory?
Well, again, I think, ma'am, I think that the Afghan security forces, where they are today to where they were 2 years ago, where they'll be in another year and a half, they continue to improve. I do not believe that the Taliban can take over the government. I do believe that Taliban understand that if they stretch the Afghan security forces, pull them out to the outer pieces of Afghanistan, cause casualties on some of the remote checkpoints.
General, I guess the question I want to understand is, without getting into numbers of troops or anything like that, do you think, based on your military advice, being the commander in Afghanistan, that we should revert to an embassy presence alone by the end of 2016? Do you think that is what we need to do to make sure that Afghanistan doesn't become yet again a haven for al-Qaeda?
Yes, ma'am. I understand the question. I have provided my chain of command options because I believe there have been a lot of different transition over the last couple of years since that decision was made. And if you go to just embassy only, again, our ability to do TAA is very limited. Our ability to do CT is much more limited.
And so your recommendations would a presence beyond the embassy, without getting into what they are?
Yeah, the different options that we've laid out through the chain of command provides our senior leadership with options above and beyond a normal embassy presence based on changes that have happened over the last 2 years and changes on the
So
ground.
here's what I want to make sure the American people understand. Why does this matter? Why does it matter that we continue to work with the Afghan security forces to ensure that Afghanistan does not go back to a place where it becomes a haven for a group like al-Qaeda?
As I said in the opening statement, ma'am, Afghanistan continues to be a dangerous area. That region of the world, all of its neighbors don't play by rules. Areas in Pakistan, areas in Afghanistan, if not continue to have pressure on them.
Does it matter to our security?
I think that, as I said up front, we haven't had another 9/11 attack on our homeland because we've had forces that have been forward deployed and have continued to provide pressure and have continued to train our Afghan partners so that they have this capability to take that on for themselves, but that's going to take some time.
I wanted to ask you about Iran's activities in Afghanistan. Can you tell us what Iran, if anything, is doing right now in Afghanistan in terms of supporting the Taliban or other groups?
Yes, ma'am. We have, at this level, I can tell you that we have some reports that Iran has provided money, weapons, mostly in the west, in the Herat area, to the Taliban to fight Daesh.
And so they're supporting the Taliban right now, Iran, with resources, money, and weapons.
Again, we have reports that they have provided money and weapons to the Taliban, mostly in the west, around the Herat area. I don't have numbers of how much money, how extensive that is, but there have been reports, yes, ma'am.
How has cooperation been with Pakistan in dealing with the Haqqani network, and what more should we be doing there?
Well, as you know, Haqqani continues to be a big threat, not only against the coalition, but also the Afghan people. Haqqani are the ones that are traditionally responsible for the high-profile attacks, the VBIDs, the vehicle-borne IEDs, the suicide vests. Haqqani are the ones that attack innocent civilians. So what I've stressed to Pakistan, and I think at all levels of our government, from DOD all the way to the White House, continue to express to Pakistan that they have to do more to get Pakistan to not provide sanctuary to Haqqani inside of Pakistan. And so we got to continue to keep the pressure on and make sure that Pakistan understands that there is a common enemy here, that Afghanistan and Pakistan should work together, and terrorism, knows no boundaries. So they have to work at that together.
Thank you, General.
Has the Iranian assistance to the Taliban increased or decreased or stayed the same recently?
Sure, I'd have to come back to you on the record. I would tell you that we saw it a few months ago as there was increased fighting with Daesh and Taliban out in the west, but I couldn't tell you if that was more or less than from before.
Senator Donnelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and General, thank you for your hard work in a very difficult place. One of the most expensive things has always been to have to take the same ground twice. And, you know, we want to look at things as they are and not as we hope. And one of the main concerns I have is that it makes it more difficult for the American and coalition troops who are in Afghanistan, that it makes it more dangerous for them if we are not able to fulfill each of the roles that the Afghan government should in terms of security, in terms of air, in terms of intelligence, in terms of logistics, that the weaker they are in those areas, it makes our men and women, puts them in greater danger. So it's a long way of asking you, are we really in a South Korean type situation where we have to put significant numbers in for a long term to help create the stability that needs to be there? It seems from year to year to year, we just kind of bounce along, or it gets a little bit worse. Is it not more applicable to a South Korean type situation?
So I wouldn't compare it to South Korea. What I would tell you is what we've been able to do over the last 14 years is provide the Afghan security forces. Remember, in 2001, they didn't have an Afghan army. They didn't have an Afghan police. So they didn't have an Afghan Air Force. So the capabilities that they have today, because of the great work by many men and women, and many that have paid the ultimate sacrifice, they're in a different place now. So they have a capability, and they want to be a partner in the region. They want to have their own CT capability to fight the terrorism that's out there, and everybody's working very hard to do that. Force protection for the coalition, the U.S. forces, the NATO forces I have, that's my number one priority, to make sure that I do everything I can to mitigate where I would have issues with that. Today, in the locations we're at, with the resources I have and the authorities that I have, I'm comfortable where I am to be able to provide the right force protection for those forces.
We have come a tremendously long way, but we want to make sure it doesn't slip back. And the worry is that if we just simply do numbers-based work, that it doesn't take into consideration what's going on in the field. And so one of the proposals I hope and assume is that you've given to the administration your best win scenario, or the best Afghan government stabilization scenario, that you say, look, here, if I'm not getting determinations on we want less people, or we want this, or we want that, here's the best plan for success. Is that going to be one of the things that's put forward?
So again, as we talked earlier, the courses of action I provided to my senior leadership are based on requirements, based on capabilities, as we talked about. And of course, every military person, any military person on the ground, wants to make sure that that end state, that outcome, is success. We're not going to put something forward that wouldn't lead to that.
When you look at where we are, in terms of the village and tribal elders, what are the things we need to do to give them long-term confidence that they should be betting on our side as opposed to the Taliban? If you are in some of those outlying areas and you see things happen, like what just happened in Kunduz, what are the kind of things they're looking for that we need to be providing?
So what they're looking for is for the Afghan government to provide them governance at the local and the district level. I think if you're a tribal elder, you're somebody on the outskirts, you're not thinking in terms of what can the coalition provide. You're thinking in terms of what can the Afghans provide. And so they look at the Afghan forces and want to make sure that they have the ability to have governance at that level. And so President Ghani, Dr. Abdullah, the senior leadership in the MOI and the MOD continually try to engage with the senior elders. They call them shuras. And so in Helmand, right after they had issues in Musakala, the senior military guy on the ground, Major General Abdullah Khan, brought in local elder leaders to work through that piece. They also try to engage local elders to build Afghan local police so that the villages can provide their own security. They'll do that in Kunduz as well as they continue to move forward, and they'll bring in the local leadership to make sure they understand what the security forces can provide and then what the Afghan government can provide.
What was missed by the Afghans in Kunduz in terms of the infiltration of the Taliban and then coming in? What did we miss, or did we know and we're not able to stop it? What happened?
So we're still looking at that, sir. The Afghans, we've asked that question. The Afghans have asked that question. President Ghani has established commission, for lack of a better term, to get up into Kunduz, to give him a readout on why this happened, who was responsible. So he has a commission that is also doing that.
The reason I ask, not to interrupt you, General, is you wonder if there's another one brewing somewhere else, and are we picking up on the signals, or are the Afghans picking up on the signals, and are we putting in place a way to stop it from happening?
So that's exactly the same question that President Ghani asked at a meeting of the National Security Council when he activated this commission. He said the exact same thing. I want to make sure I understand what happened, why it happened, and I want to make sure that it can't happen again. So we need to get the senior police and Army into Kunduz City to do that. And if you have people that gave up and walked off the job, then they need to be disciplined. If you have general officers that didn't fight, then they should not be in those positions. So he has asked all those tough questions.
Thank you, General.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General, thank you for your service. In an address to the nation on 27th of May in 2014, President Obama said Afghanistan, and I quote, "We will bring America's longest war to a responsible end," and then announced calendar dates for the withdrawal. And I will quote him again, "At the beginning of 2015, we will have approximately 9,800 U.S. service members. By the end of 2015, we will have reduced that presence by roughly half, and we will have consolidated our troops in Kabul and Bagram airfield. 1 year later, by the end of 2016, our military will draw down to a normal embassy presence in Kabul with security assistance component, just as we've done in Iraq." And looking at that, number one was from 9,800 down now. Have we drawn from 9,800 down in a manner consistent with following that goal to its end as indicated in 27 May?
No, sir, because what happened is back in the February-March timeframe, we asked for flexibility. And so President Obama provided me flexibility on the timing and the number. And as you remember, 9,800 to provide train advice and assist through this very first fighting season. If I had to get down to the 5,500 number by the end of this year, I would have had to start closing bases like Jalalabad, Kandahar, and even Bagram. So I asked for, President Ghani asked for some flexibility, and currently, that 9,800 number I still have, and are not going to get down below that, or required to get down below that till probably May of 2016 timeframe, as we move toward the current projection of this embassy base. But again, I've gone in with different courses of action that outline pros and cons of different locations and different force levels based on the capabilities that we need to continue to provide to the Afghans.
But based upon that, it's fair to assume that Bagram is not in the position of being closed down at this time.
So the current plan would have Bagram closed by the end of 2016.
Have you made any movements toward that end yet?
Sure, and, as we've, over the last couple of years, we've had to close hundreds and hundreds of bases. So every day we continually, what we call de-scope, and get rid of buildings, get rid of equipment, send back to the United States, turn over to the Afghans, other partners. And so every day, even in Kabul, where I'm at, we continue to de-scope. We do that at Bagram, we do that at Jalalabad, we do that at Kandahar. So I'm doing that every day, but I have not reached a point where, if a decision is made to keep Bagram, that is irreversible.
Okay. With regard to Taliban funding, if you could look at it right now and determine where most of the funding is coming from, could you list out where the funding for Taliban is currently coming from in Afghanistan?
So a lot of the funding comes from narcotics, from drug smuggling, comes from kidnapping, comes from other countries that support the Taliban. So there's a whole list of it.
Primarily local unit by local unit. I mean, are they doing it on their own, separate, or is there a grand plan in terms of all of them working together in a concerted effort?
So I think the Taliban is organized where they have committees. They have a political committee. They have an operations committee. That kind of thing. But they are very independent, as they decentralize, I think is a better word, as they conduct operations throughout Afghanistan.
Thank you. General Kim's report the one which he would be working on as we speak. Is there a time frame for a release of that report?
So I have not determined that time frame. I want to make sure that he has the time required to talk to everybody that he needs to talk to. He's been up in Kunduz for the last several days. I have had the ability to talk to him each morning here. He's getting more and more people to talk to, but as he talks to one person, that leads to 2 more people to talk to. And so I think this is going to take some time. As soon as I can get a preliminary assessment out of this, I'll go back to my senior leadership. And again, we want to make sure that we can be transparent, open, very candid about what happened here, learn from that, make sure something like this never, ever happens again.
Reasonable to expect at least a preliminary report within 30 days?
Sir, I think so, yes, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to be very clear, General, and I think you've made this clear, but in your professional military judgment, conditions on the ground at the present time would require some revision of the withdrawal plan to a Kabul-centric 1,000 personnel by the end of 2016. Is that correct?
I'll stomp my foot. Yes, sir. The options I provide pros and cons of different levels of support above and beyond the 1,000, and I base that based on my experience on the ground and the conditions I've seen, as I talked about Daesh, ISIL, what's happened in Pakistan, the National Unity Government. So all of those are factors and variables that I consider as I worked on different courses of action. Yes, sir.
But I'm not asking you what you recommended. I'm asking you for your professional judgment as you're sitting here today that there should be some revision to that plan.
Sir, yes, sir.
Thank you. Political questions. I'm concerned about the Ghani-Abdullah relationship. I understand there's still some ministers not appointed. They're still in different buildings. They don't seem to be communicating effectively. This war is going to be impossible without some kind of unified government in Kabul. How are the politics of the national unity government developing, and is there some role that we have to play to move that along?
Sir, thanks for the question. Again, sir, I think every single day, both myself, my partner, Ambassador McKinley, we work this, and we understand how important having a national unity government is. And I think the Afghans understand this as well. To think that there are people that don't want the national unity government, that are what I would call spoilers out there trying to disrupt that, I think we'd be foolish. So there are. And I think both President Ghani and Dr. Abdullah understand this as well. And they know that they have to do better to sync up where they're going. I think, you know, on major policy issues, both President Ghani and Dr. Abdullah, there's no daylight between them. I think they agree on those major policy issues on what is good for Afghanistan and its future. I think where they have the issues is determining who's going to be this minister, who's going to be the provincial police chief, those kind of things as they go back and deal with their constituencies. But I think they continue to understand they have to make those tough decisions. And September 29th, they had a year, so a little over a year, and they understand now is the time to do that. And I've seen an increased, over the last couple of weeks, an increased dialogue to make sure that that happens. But that's a continual issue, and I think you know, again, the ambassador works that, I work that. All the other international community ambassadors that are in Afghanistan understand how important that is, and everybody consistently works very hard to make sure that both President Ghani and Dr. Abdullah understand that. As far as the ministers, the only one that I know of not appointed is the acting Minister of Defense, Standing Zai, who I think is very, very capable and would be a big mistake and a tragedy if the Parliament was to do something in Afghanistan to make sure that he wasn't the minister. But he's absolutely the real deal for Afghanistan as they move forward in the Ministry of Defense.
So finalizing that appointment would be a step forward.
Sure it would. And right now, President Ghani has absolute trust and confidence in Minister Standing Zai. He continues to work as the acting minister, and I think he's making decisions as the acting minister just as he would as a minister. So
well, I hope you'll maintain. I mean, we have a substantial role there. We're very important to them, and I hope we can use that influence to move this along. I was disappointed, for example, when President Ghani spoke to the Congress. Dr. Abdullah was sitting in the front row. There was a great round of applause. That would have been a wonderful moment for President Ghani to call Dr. Abdullah up and receive it was a kind of symbolic gesture. It didn't happen. I hope you'll continue to encourage President Ghani to loosen up a little bit. He won. He could afford to be magnanimous. That's free political advice to the president of another country.
Sure, thank you. And as you know, sir, Dr. Abdullah represented Afghanistan at the UNGA in New York City here last week and took that on. And I know that he and President Ghani continued to talk every day as they went through that. So I think that's a step in the right direction as well.
Thank you. Another political question. What's the feeling of the population of Afghanistan about the Taliban? Is the Taliban gaining adherents, losing adherents? Are they about the same? If there were an honest poll taken, do you not approve of the Taliban? What would the results be?
So the people of Afghanistan understand that the Taliban attack civilians. The Taliban kill innocent women and children. So the support that the Taliban have from the average Afghan is not favorable. In fact, that percentage over the years has continued to go down and down. The Afghan people have great confidence in the number one institution in Afghanistan is their army. You know, they have issues again with the government when they see terror, when they see something happen that frightens them. They're going to blame that on the government and on the Afghan security forces. But I think if you put them side by side and said you can pick the national government, you can pick the army, you can pick the Taliban, they absolutely would not pick the Taliban. The Taliban, again, go into many remote places. In some places, they may provide some sort of Sharia law or governance, but I think in the end, the people understand that the way of the future for Afghanistan is with the national government having a very professionalized army and police, and so they do not support the Taliban.
Thank you. I'm out of time. Perhaps for the record, you could give us some thoughts on whose side Pakistan is on in this struggle and what role they're playing, just for the record. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, General.
Senator Graham.
Thank you, General. You keeping Captain McCarthy in check there?
Sorry, I'll take that for the record, sir.
Okay. Could you very briefly describe what winning would look like in Afghanistan from an American point of view, and what losing would look like?
I think winning would have a stable Afghanistan, a stable government, would have a professionalized army and police that provided governance for the people of Afghanistan, that people could go to school, people could work, and I think the opposite of that, an unstable Afghanistan would provide opportunity for insurgents to use ungoverned spaces to go after something like our homeland in the future.
If we had the right configuration in January 2017, what's the likelihood of winning over time?
So I think we have a great opportunity if we continue to support the Afghan government and continue to work with the Afghan security forces. This is our best opportunity. We haven't had a government like this that reached out to not only to the U.S. but to the international community. We haven't a government that takes on its responsibility to professionalize the Army and the police like we have. We haven't had a government that understands what the Army and the police are going through. So this is our best opportunity.
Do the Afghan people want us to stay, by and large?
So the Afghan people that I talk to, that I deal with, and I do bring in an advisory committee that's made up of different facets of Afghan life to talk to about every month. I do have a women's advisory committee that I bring in to make sure we understand gender issues. Overwhelmingly, the Afghans support the coalition and want to continue to have that continued support.
Do you agree with me if we go down to 1,000 forces, 1,000 people, Kabul-centric, embassy-centric, like 90% chance that the country falls apart?
So I don't know if I would put a percentage on it, sir. What I would say is our ability to provide, train, advise, and assist and continue to grow the Afghan forces would be very limited.
What about the counterterrorism mission?
Sir, if we're at, just from Kabul, I could not do a counterterrorism mission.
Okay, now tell the American people why it is in their interest for you to have a counterterrorism footprint in Afghanistan.
So I think two reasons. I think, first off, we need to continue to build the Afghan capacity for their CT element, and that takes our men and women to continue to work with them as they do today. Their special operating forces, their CT piece, are probably the best in the region and continue to get better. But it's going to take time to be able to raise it. So if we continue to build their capacity, they want to be a regional partner. They want to be able to handle those issues in that region. To have a CT capability to keep pressure on some of the ungoverned spaces, you know, we do have people that continue to want to do bad things to people.
Let's dig into that a bit. A better trained Afghan counterterrorism force is good for the stability of Afghanistan. Do you agree?
I agree, sir.
But there are no substitute for American counterterrorism forces that would protect the homeland. Does that make sense?
So I believe that, you know, our counterterrorism forces are the best in the world.
But they would have a focus that the Afghans would not have.
Again, we want to continue to build the Afghan forces, yes, sir, but our forces provide our best opportunity.
I'm just trying to make the case, as well as I know how, that we would be nuts to not have a counterterrorism force inside of Afghanistan, U.S. presence, counterterrorism folks, making sure that we never get attacked again like 9/11. Does that make sense to you?
So I think General Dempsey has laid out a regional CT piece, to have regional CT throughout different spots of the world to ensure.
But Afghanistan would be the centerpiece of that.
Sir, I would concur with that, yes, sir.
And we're welcome there. They would welcome this presence.
Absolutely, yes,
The
sir.
only reason we wouldn't have a counterterrorism force in Afghanistan is because we decided not to ourselves. The Afghans welcomed that presence.
Sure, they welcome us there, yes, sir.
Parwan Prison, is that moving forward in an acceptable way to use it as a national security detention facility?
Sure, Parwan is the gold standard for Afghanistan, yes, sir.
And this new president is willing to use that prison to take high-value targets, put them in jail so they can't bribe their way out. Is that correct?
Sir, he has moved high-value targets from other provinces into Parwan because, again, it is the gold standard. They have had some issues with some other prisons here lately, but not at Parwan.
And just to end with my last question, do you see a commitment by President Ghani and Abdullah to do things differently than Karzai that give you optimism in terms of the future of Afghanistan if we continue to partner?
Sure, without a doubt.
Thank you.
Senator McCaskill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, General Campbell. Thank you to all that serve under you for really hard stuff that they're doing every day. I'll be looking forward to the investigation over the tragedy of the Doctors Without Borders hit as it develops. Corruption, it continues to be a major, major challenge in Afghanistan. I know that Ghani made this a focus of his campaign when he ran to lead the government in Afghanistan. But I noticed the New York Times reporting last week that corruption played a role in the Taliban's recent success in Kunduz, saying that the local security forces were extorting money from the locals, which raised sympathy for the Taliban. They were being, in fact, hit up by the folks that we've been spending hundreds of millions of dollars to train, and obviously that's unacceptable. Could you talk about that, and what is your assessment of the risk right now of corruption as it relates to the work we're trying to do with the Afghan National Security Forces?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for the question. I think President Ghani has stated, many people say that corruption is the #1 issue as they look to the future. President Ghani and Dr. Abdullah have really tried to get after this from a couple of different levels. One is he knows that contracting has caused a lot of corruption-type issues, and so he's instituted a national procurement director agency that looks at every single contract to make sure that those are valid, that he can get this corruption out of the contracting piece. The other area he's looked at very hard is on leadership and trying to pick the right leaders based on their experience, based on the right skill sets, And so, like something that you referred to up in Kunduz, where people are taking money, extorting from the local folks up there, if he had the right leadership in place, that would not happen. So it's going to take time for him to get to all the right levels to make sure he breeds this culture throughout the security forces that, corruption is not good, and that if you are corrupt, that you are going to be removed, you're going to be held accountable. I've seen several instances over the last several months where they've had different cases where both in the MOI, the Ministry of Interior, and the Ministry of Defense, where they have prosecuted folks that they found to be corrupt. But it's going to take time, ma'am. I know they're both committed to it. They both have worked very hard with their Inspector General counterparts in both the MOI and MOD to try to help them get after the corruption. And so I think they're both committed, but it's going to...
And you're confident in their sincerity?
I am, yes, ma'am.
Okay. ISIL in Afghanistan, obviously, this is a problem that we are seeing the Taliban turning, and all the different factions in the Middle East are a challenge for us, but in some ways they're also an advantage because there is this fractionalization that keeps everyone from uniting in terms of effective forces. And I'm worried about the conversion of some of the Taliban to an ISIS or ISIL loyalty situation, and would like your take on that. And I noticed in your previous testimony you indicated that you're seeing a switch of allegiance of the Taliban in Pakistan to ISIL. If that is the case, I certainly would like you to speak to that briefly, because obviously Pakistan, that's a whole other bag of worries in light of the fact that they have a nuclear capability.
Thank you, ma'am. If I could hit the Pakistan piece first, because General Raheel Sharif and I have talked about that as late as last week here, and he has absolutely he has emphasized that ISIL, Daesh, has no place in Pakistan. So he absolutely believes that that will be a threat as he moves forward, and wants to make sure that that has no place. So I don't see Pakistan aligning with ISIL, if that's what you were saying there.
And you see their government committed to doing what is necessary without us having to prod, push, and pay for that effort.
I have talked to General Raheel on that several times, and I do believe that he's genuine, and he is pushing both his Army and his intel services to fight Daesh. Yes, ma'am. And on the other piece, as far as ISIL and Daesh, and we have seen, as I said earlier, that I would have called them nascent several months ago. We put them in a category of operationally emergent as they continue to recruit, to gain a base in predominantly Nangarhar in the eastern part of Afghanistan. They are fighting other Taliban because the philosophy there is a little bit different. We have not seen them reach out to outside of Afghanistan, but I think that would be a goal that they have if they had the ability to continue to grow. President Ghani has said that the Al-Qaeda was Windows 1.0 and that Daesh is Windows 7.0 in their ability to use social media to recruit. So he is concerned. I've made it early on a priority information requirement, a PIR for me, and I continue to look at that very hard. We have talked to all the intelligence agencies inside of Afghanistan. We're trying to partner Pakistan and Afghanistan up to look at ISIL, Daesh as well, to make sure that we all have a common operating picture of what they're trying to do in the Khorasan province area.
Are they helping us with intelligence on the ground, General? In terms of, are they embedding effectively in terms of human intelligence for us in both Pakistan and Afghanistan?
You talking about the Afghan forces, ma'am? I mean, Afghanistan probably, well, not probably, Afghanistan has much better human than I have.
Obviously.
Yes, ma'am, because of,
but you think are they effectively putting enough resources behind that?
They have a very good NDS, which is their intel agency. They work very well with the other pillars of police and the Army, and I think what they've developed here in the last couple months, what they call the Nasrat Center, is a National Joint Fusion Intelligence Center, where they try to take intelligence from MOI, MOD, and the NDS to fuse national-level target sets, and that's something new, and that's very good.
Thank you. I apologize for the follow-up.
Senator Fisher.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, General, for being here today. To look further into that flow of the foreign fighters that are moving into Afghanistan, are we seeing more of a regional draw with ISIL? In February, you mentioned that a few of the Taliban seem to be reflagging under the ISIS banner there. Are we seeing that regional draw, or are they drawing from outside the region in North Africa, say? And then how does that compare to the Taliban? Are we going to have local versus foreign fighters? Is that going to continue to grow in Afghanistan, and will it be similar to what we see with al-Nusra and ISIL that takes place in Syria?
Thank you, ma'am. I think with ISIL or Daesh, again, particularly in the Nangarhar area, we've seen mostly internal Taliban that want to rebrand, TTP that want to rebrand. But there are reports of people, foreign fighters, coming from outside of Afghanistan. I couldn't give you a good percentage or numbers, but we have seen increased reporting that there are some foreign fighters that come in and want to try to establish, again, a base there and try to bring in, some sort of funding stream to build a base in Nangarhar. But I think there are ways from that. And again, the Afghan forces, our forces, continue to look at that. The Taliban I think the Taliban, if they have foreign fighter help, whether it's Uzbek, Chechen, I mean, we have seen pieces and parts of that up in the north. I think we've seen, there are reports from the Afghans as they see a lot more of the foreign fighters into the Badakhshan, into the Kunduz, into the Saripol area. But as far as numbers or an increase in foreign fighters, I don't think I could give that to you, ma'am.
What numbers are we looking at for ISIL right now, and also with the Taliban? What numbers are in Afghanistan? Do you have any hard numbers on that? I know you said it's difficult to determine the number of recruits, but where are we?
Ma'am, the numbers I would give you, would be based on different reports I've seen. I couldn't give you how accurate that would be, but I think in open press, what I've seen, anywhere between 1,000 and 3,000 on the Daesh. And, for years and years, the numbers of Taliban inside of Afghanistan has gone everywhere from, 20,000 to 80,000. And I think hard to distinguish in there which people are just sympathize with the Taliban and which ones are actually hardcore Taliban. And the intel community continues to look at that. But what I would say is that the Afghan security forces have really impacted Taliban this year based on the number of casualties that I believe they have caused the Taliban.
With the Afghan National Police and also with the local police forces, we visited about that a little bit yesterday when you were in my office. What do you think are their biggest challenges, the biggest weaknesses that they have, and will they be able to become professional in moving forward as we assess what our position is going to be in Afghanistan?
Ma'am, I think for the police, again, the number one issue that I continue to stress with them is getting the right leadership. The police have several thousand that are untrained that provincial police chiefs have hired, and they haven't gone through the requisite training. So they're doing that to get them out on a checkpoint or get them into the fight because they believe they've been stressed in different areas. But they got to get them into the right training to make sure that they have that. I think with the Afghan local police, these are the ones that have taken a lot of the casualties because they veered outside of what they were designed to do, and that was designed to defend their local village. They weren't designed to be 5 kilometers, 10 kilometers outside of that village trying to take on a lot of Taliban. They weren't equipped, they weren't trained for that, but yet in some of the local areas, they've misutilized them by putting them on those checkpoints. Again, I believe that training is the key for the Afghan police, but I think what we need to say here is that the police, in many cases, are doing the same thing as the Army. So in a counterinsurgency fight, they're fighting very, very tough like the Army, and they're not manned, and they're not equipped like the Army.
If the President would decide as one of the options out there to keep our forces in Afghanistan longer, what do you believe would be the reaction and the commitment of our NATO partners? Would they support that decision? Would they be able to maintain their contributions as well?
Ma'am, I think it would be country dependent. We have 41 countries that are tied into Resolute support right now. The ones that I've engaged with for the most part, are very supportive and want to continue to provide assistance to Afghanistan, either by contributing troops or providing financial support. But I think, again, the United States, once the United States makes the decision, we'll see NATO come into that.
So you believe there would be support from many NATO partners, also from the Afghan people, if we would choose to remain and continue a mission to stabilize the country?
Absolutely, yes, ma'am.
Thank you, sir.
Senator Gillibrand.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to continue the line of questioning about the incident we read about in the New York Times about young boys being abused by Afghan commanders, as well as women and girls. What is the military's policy when a service member becomes aware of an instance of abuse? There's been some discussion about what the policy actually is.
Yes, ma'am. What I said in a press release a week or so ago was that there is no policy that says disregard that. What our policy has said since 2011 is that, you have to report instances of sexual abuse by the Afghan security forces up your chain of command. And so that's what I expect of all of our men and women serving in Afghanistan to be able to do.
So the article talked about service members who were disciplined, who wanted to intervene, or who reported it up their chain of command. Have you investigated those instances?
Ma'am, as I said earlier, those from the New York Times article, these are cases from 2010, 2011, and 2012, I believe. So, no, I didn't have anything to do with those cases. Any reports that would come to me, I would make sure that we provided that to the Afghan government as well. President Ghani has made it very clear that he has a policy that he does not tolerate that, and he will prosecute that. So the cases that you referred to are 4, 5, 6 years ago. I can't speak to those.
So have you followed up, though, to see if those cases were handled properly?
Ma'am, I have not been involved in the 2010, 11, or 12 cases, no, ma'am.
So who should report to this committee about an investigation of those specific cases? Because if the policy changed in 2011, then arguably the cases from 2011 and 2012, if true, were handled incorrectly. Who's doing that investigation?
So, ma'am, I'll have to take that for the record. I don't know.
Okay, please report to the committee who's doing the investigation, when we'll have the results, because if those individuals did report this and were told to mind your own business, then obviously their commanders were not following the policy in 2011 and 2012. What was the policy before 2011?
Ma'am, as I think Senator Cotton talked about, and I was there in 2002, 2003, 2010 myself. This is my third tour there. I've never seen a policy that didn't report it. So, and I would tell you that there's always been a policy that if you saw this, that you would report. This is a fundamental value of our military, to treat people with dignity and respect. So I can't imagine somebody not doing that.
So why do you believe that the various troops who have reported this were told it's their culture? And why is there an understanding by some troops that you don't intervene when it's their culture? Are they poorly trained or just unknowledgeable, or do you think commanders are getting it wrong in the field?
Ma'am, I can't speak, again, for those individual cases, and I think those are disciplinary cases that are either completed or ongoing. I would tell you that all the forces that I've been involved in absolutely understand that what the requirement is. And again, as I reiterated earlier, that I've asked all of our personnel currently in theater to go back and receive this training again to make sure that we have 100% so that we didn't miss anybody.
So what would we do today? So if it was reported that you hear screaming from Afghan military or Afghan troops, from commanders, from children, what would our soldiers do?
Our soldiers should report that up their chain of command. Yes,
and then what does the chain of command do with that information?
So, ma'am, we would make sure that that information got to the right authorities within the Afghan government, to the senior leadership in the Afghan.
So if the senior Afghan leadership said, yeah, we're not going to do anything about it because it's our culture, what do we then do?
Well, with the Afghan leadership that I deal with, I don't think would say that. Again, I've talked to President Ghani, Dr. Abdullah, the senior MOI, MOD, the senior Army and the police leaders. They absolutely understand, this is not conduct. This is criminal conduct, and they understand that they have to do something about it, and they want to hold people accountable. Are there going to be people that disregard that in Afghanistan, just like you would have maybe in any other country. Yes. But again, the people that I have
But you're saying then, though, that our policy is still not to intervene. What our policy is, based on what you just said, is we report it to the Afghanistan authorities, and if they choose to do nothing, we do nothing.
No, I didn't say that, ma'am.
So what do you do if they refuse to do something?
I would go back and make sure, again, in the 14 months I have been there, I have not had a case come to me that I had to go back to the Afghan authorities and say, you need to do something on this. And I think that is a result of the Afghans understanding that they have to get after this. So I think they've improved in that area. So I haven't had to go back and do that. But if something was brought through my chain of command to me and that there was abuse of children, this is criminal conduct, I would make sure I went to the Afghans and said, you know, here is a report. You need to go check out this report. And I would expect them to be able to do that. We work through our essential function 3 and the rule of law folks I have to continue to help provide, train, advise, assist in this area with our senior Afghans, with their military lawyers as well. So we would absolutely expect them to go do something. If they didn't do something and there was credible evidence that, you know, something happened here, then I would raise that higher to the president, and I would demand that, you know, this is something has to be done, or, you know, I will withhold this. There has to be conditions to this so that they understand that. Blaming it on culture is not the way that I think our forces have gone here.
So you, just to conclude, you're saying you would raise it to President Obama and try to make him engage?
I would raise it to President Ghani first.
President Ghani,
yes,
okay.
And I would raise it first to the Ministry of Defense, Minister of Interior, the senior officials that I deal with. Again, as soon as this news article came out, you know, I called President Ghani on this and said, hey, you know, we got to make sure that, and before I even finished the sentence, President Ghani said, hey, that is absolutely criminal behavior. I will prosecute anyone that I find that has done this. And he put out and talked to, the very next day, I went to a National Security Council meeting. The President was there. Dr. Abdullah was there, the MOD, MOI, all the senior cabinet members there. And before he started in his agenda of things that he had to get through, he raised this issue and he made sure that every minister understood that this behavior would not be tolerated. So I have no doubt that Afghans get this. And I have no doubt that our military personnel understand what is expected of them.
Senator Tillis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. General Campbell, welcome. Last time I saw you, it was in Afghanistan, and before that, it was before this committee back in February. I do think that we have to go back and talk about a number of the positive things that have occurred as a result of our presence in Afghanistan. You did a great job of summarizing that back in February, life expectancies, the number of children in school, progress on protecting women and children. It's a great story, and but for America's presence, I don't think it would be a story that you'd been telling back in February. I want to go back to this drawdown, and something that I think you mentioned in February and when we were talking with you earlier this year. It takes, you just don't wake up Monday morning and say, I've got to bring down 1,000 troops and all the materials that go with them by the end of the month. It takes a lot of planning. I know that you've got a proposal to the President. He's given you flexibility, which is what's allowed you to keep the 9,800 there now. But at what point do you have to start taking actions for the material drawdown to hit the 2016 end-of-year target? I mean, we've got to be weeks or months away from you having to put a lot of those plans in place.
Yes, sir. Sir, it becomes a matter of physics. So at some point in time, as you close.
How quickly do you have to start? If the President doesn't make any change in decision, when do we start seeing material efforts to draw our troop forces down to the embassy presence in Kabul?
So as I said earlier, every single day we continue to de-scope all of our bases out there. So we're trying to get rid of unnecessary or stuff that, you know, was no longer required in theater.
So you're effectively, I've got a couple of questions, so I apologize for being short. So you're effectively drawing down based on, I mean, you're already taking the steps to draw down to something that we know will be less than 9,800. We just don't know what the number is.
Sure I am, but I've also made sure that based on the courses of action that I've recommended, if that is, if we get a decision on that, it's not irreversible yet.
Well, I think the administration needs to be crisp on this. I know you've provided it to your leadership, but this is not something that should take long, and I think anybody who's followed this situation knows the President's going down a perilous path if he goes far off of what you already have in Afghanistan. You mentioned something else that I think is important that I haven't heard you talk about, and that's in 2017, the other funding streams that are at risk that are also an important part of the gains that we've made and protecting those gains, I think, with other partners. Can you tell me about any progress or any concerns you have about that?
So I think, this is a very critical year coming up for 2016. They'll meet at the Warsaw conference middle of next year, and that'll determine all the donor nations for how much they will donate for 2018, 2019, and 2020 for Afghanistan. So,
but that is critically, it's something that's still an open switch and something that's critically important if we're going to continue to build on our gains there. Would you agree with that?
sure I do. I think, again, having the international community have confidence in Afghanistan is important, that we don't lose and have donor fatigue there.
Thank you. Something else that I just want to reinforce that Senator Graham touched on, and he was trying to make the point that there's counterterrorism resources to help us do our job in the region. But what I think many of the American people do not understand is that the value of the CT efforts with respect to threats in other areas of the region and potential threats to the homeland. This was the birthplace of the 9/11 attacks. There are bad people there who are trying to plot terrorist actions against Americans, whether it could be American installations abroad or right here at the homeland. So getting down to an embassy presence only, we've heard you say that we would lose all of our counterterrorism presence in that region. Did I hear you correctly?
Sure, we would not have the ability to conduct counterterrorism as I do today if we were just based in Kabul.
Yeah. So based on the current plan, a plan that the administration is considering, unless he changes that plan, we know it's going to be diminished, but it could almost all go away by the end of next year, based on the current plans as you understand them today.
So as I said up front, the planning assumption in the current plan and glide slope that I'm on is to go to about 1,000 by the end of 2016. Yes,
I think it's irresponsible and it's dangerous, and I appreciate the work that you're doing because I know that you probably have a different view. I respect the fact that you're going through your chain of command, but this President needs to understand he needs to be decisive and take different action or he's putting American interest at risk. Thank you all for your service.
Senator Manchin.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Manchin.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, General. I appreciate it. I think what we're trying to get our hands around as far as should we stay, if we do stay, how many will stay, and what effect will that have? And it goes back to the training, the money we've spent, and the amount of effort and time we've spent to training, how many people we have adequately to continue to retrain, or will they ever be able to take the training over themselves, or we ever trust them for that, and how much money would that cost? And it just goes on and on and on, as you know. The bottom line is do you think that Afghanistan is more stable and better prepared to take care of itself and with our help or without our help, and how much of our help than Iraq was? Because I think everyone's looking to the failed policies in Iraq and saying, okay, why would you repeat that? But I think it's a different scenario, as you said. The leadership in Afghanistan is much more different mindset and determined today than Iraq was when we made our decision to leave. So if you can just give me just a little clear, I just heard you say about 1,000 is what you intend to recommend. Is that wrong?
No, sir. 1,000 is the current decision that we're on. So 1,000.
That's what we're on, right? We're on a glide path to 1,000 right now by 2016.
Yes, sir, by the end of 2016. So that's the current plan. That's to go to a normal embassy presence that President Obama discussed back in 2014.
Which would be it'd be hard to explain that basically that would be the same glide path we had, if not maybe a little difference in Iraq, and we saw the results of Iraq.
Sir, Afghanistan is not Iraq, as we talked about. You have a government that wants to have you there. You have a government that wants to have a counterterrorism capability. You have a fighting force that is very resilient. So I think there's so many differences between Iraq and Afghanistan.
Do you think that'll change that recommendation from 1,000, that'll be upped?
So again, I provided courses of action recommendations to my leadership that provides our president, our national senior leadership with options based on changes that have happened in the last 2 years.
And the money we've spent right now, I mean, it's an unbelievable amount of money for training the Afghans. Do you expect that to continue, us pouring the money into there for them to be able to train their people?
So we're working very hard to make sure we can continue to bring that money down.
Do they have any economy at all, or any other than the war effort? Is their economy sucking off the U.S. taxpayers? Do they have any ability to carry their own load financially?
Sir, in the Chicago and the Tokyo commitments are required to provide about $500 million toward their national security, and each year we try to up that. Their economy is going to be very, very tough, and President Ghani, based on his background in the World Bank, is working that very hard. They had a very successful regional economic conference here 2 or 3 weeks ago in Afghanistan. There was just a Dubai conference where they had about 170+ investors come to take a look at the different airfields that we would leave. But it's going to take a long time to build their economy that they would not be able to have the army. We built an army and a police they can't afford, sir. So they will be very dependent upon the international community to continue to provide that money for years to come.
And General, finally, on the crash of the C-130, we had 6 service members. One was from Marshall County, West Virginia, Ryan Hammond, Sergeant Ryan Hammond. I spoke to his parents and his wife, and I told him I would try to get all the information I could of how this could have happened. C-130s, we fly a lot of C-130s in our guard, as you know, and they're very capable, able aircraft. Do you have any information that you can share with me that I could share with the parents?
Sure, my thoughts and prayers are with all the families. That very morning, I went out to the crash site. Right after that, I went to Bagram and talked to all of our C-130 crews just to gather them in and talk to them. I did that. Again, investigation is ongoing.
Was it on takeoff? Is when the accident happened on takeoff?
Yes, sir. And so I can talk to you one-on-one. And
if you could, I'd appreciate it, sir. If I could just give his family some relief and some closure.
Okay, sir.
Thank you.
Senator Sullivan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, General, for your testimony. It's very enlightening, and I know it's not easy to testify when you have options on the way forward and you're not sure the Commander-in-Chief agrees with you or not, so I think all of us appreciate your testimony. I'm going to follow up on a number of the previous questions you've been asked. First, Senator Shaheen had asked about a UN investigation possibly into the hospital accident. Does the UN usually investigate major deliberate attacks on civilians in Afghanistan when they're conducted by the Taliban?
Sure, I haven't seen that in the past. Quite frankly, I don't know.
I don't think they do, typically. So do you think it would seem fair or balanced if the UN conducted an investigation which was clearly on something that was accidental, the hospital bombing, when they don't investigate deliberate Taliban killing of civilians? You think that would be viewed as fair or balanced or something the command needs or would welcome?
So I can't comment on how the UN would do that. What I can comment on, as I said up front earlier, is I have complete trust and confidence in the team that we have to be thorough, transparent, and if there are mistakes made, we'll make sure that those come out. If there's people I have to hold accountable, we'll make sure we'll do that. So I have every trust and confidence in the U.S. and the NATO investigation ongoing.
I think so too. I think most of us here do as well, and I certainly don't think an additional investigation by the UN would be warranted or welcomed by this committee. Let me ask the issue again. This is Senator Graham, Senator Tillis's questions. You know, you're very focused on managing risk. If we go forward with the current plan, does it increase the risk that the Taliban could take over the government in 2 or 3 or 4 years out?
So again, I think we have another 1.5 years to continue to grow the Afghan security forces. If we went down to 1,000 around Kabul, we would not have the ability to do train, advise, assist with our.
How about would it increase the risk that the homeland would be attacked? You know, Senator Tillis has a very good and direct question that our CT capability would essentially end. Would that increase the risk that I'm just talking incrementally increase the risk that the United States of America would be attacked?
So again, when the decision was made in 2014 by President Obama on the 1,000 going to a normalized embassy, CT was not one of the variables tied into that decision.
Let me ask just on the timelines. You know, I was a lieutenant colonel in the Marines a couple of years ago. I was assigned to a OPT in Afghanistan by General Dunford. When they were looking at the force posture, our OPT was looking at the force posture that would take us from the OEF mission to the Resolute support mission. And it was a little frustrating to be working on that because we hadn't gotten any guidance in terms of numbers from the senior military, or actually senior civilian. So you can't, you've said that you can't talk about the options, but have you actually been given a timeline by which the White House is going to respond to your options and requests? As Senator Tillis mentioned, you know, the clock's ticking. And have you either received information that you're going to be given guidance by a certain date, or have you requested a certain date by which to be given guidance, given that the clock is ticking on this very important issue?
Sure, as we lay out, as you know, then on a planning perspective, as we lay out different courses of action, we have what we call DPs, or decision points. And so in all of our courses of action, they would have a decision point on when that decision would have to be made.
And are we approaching one pretty soon?
So we would be irreversible.
Are we approaching one pretty soon?
So I know that everybody in DOD, everybody in the NSC is working very hard to take a look at these different courses of action. And as we talked about the retrograde and the time that it takes out, I think the senior leadership understands when those decision points are and when they have to get those out. And yes, sir.
Let me ask a final question. You know, having spent some time in Afghanistan and Pakistan, I know you would probably agree with this. There's a narrative in the region that in the 1980s we were very active there because of the Soviet invasion, and we were very helpful in terms of our assistance to people in those two different countries. And then there's a sense that in the 1990s we, quote, abandoned the region. And I think that's a very powerful narrative. I don't know if you've seen it there, but I certainly have seen it there when I've been out in that part of the world. You mentioned, and I think it's a really important testimony today, that we are overwhelmingly welcomed, as you mentioned, by the civilian population, by the Afghan leadership. Do you think if we draw down to just an embassy force, which is kind of what we have in the rest of the world, that we would once again resurrect this idea of abandoning the region, of abandoning the people there, the governments there? And if that were the case, how do you think that would impact America's national security if in the part of the world that's really the heart of the battle against al-Qaeda and other places, the heart of the world that, you know, brought us 9/11, that we were viewed once again as unreliable and having abandoned the region, which is a narrative that's very powerful still in that region? What do you think that would? Do you think that narrative could be would be resurrected? And how do you think that would impact our national security?
So I've been tied up with Afghanistan for many years, and I think anybody in the military would tell you presence equals influence, and so the ability to continue to provide, train, advise, and assist our Afghan partners to continue to improve upon their capability is what any military person would want to tell you. You know, and again, I said that the Afghan people continue to want to have a coalition presence. They understand the impact that that has for them. So, you know, that's what they want. They'll continue to want that, I believe, unless we do something that dissuades them from that. But we've come a long way there, and a lot of this has to do with this new national unit government. And remember, they understand, different from where President Karzai was, that we've provided a lot of blood, sweat, and tears here, that many of our men and women provided the ultimate sacrifice. We've expended a lot of money, and they want to make sure that they don't let us down here as well.
Thank you, General. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Ernst.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, General Campbell, for being here, and thank you for your outstanding service and that of your men and women as well. I do appreciate it very, very much, as do my constituents. I'm going to go back to a couple points. They've been talked about many, many times already this morning, General. But going back to the sexual assault, the sexual abuses by the Afghan National Security Forces against the Afghans, particularly the young boys, it seems that many of the folks that I've talked to that have served in that region, American soldiers, it was common knowledge that this was happening. And I don't believe that there was a DOD policy that we turn a blind eye. Matter of fact, you've said since 2011 there has been a policy in place, educational materials, classes, so forth. But there may have been kind of an unofficial do-nothing policy. We are starting to see that corrected as it comes to light, but it does affect the men and women that serve with us in our forces and how they operate with the ANSF. I mean, that is an issue, a trust issue. And there was a 2011 report by Dr. Jeffrey Borden. He was a Red Team political and military behavioral scientist. He supported half of the RC East, and he commented, and I'm quoting, "Several U.S. soldiers reported that they had observed many cases of child abuse and neglect that infuriated them and alienated them from the civilian populace, and that there were numerous accounts of Canadian troops in Kandahar complaining about the rampant sexual abuse of children they have witnessed ANSF personnel commit, including the cultural practice of bachi-bazi, as well as the raping and sodomizing of little boys," end quote. Has any service member or civilian under your command now or during your previous command of RC East reported up the chain an allegation of an ANSF sexual assault against Afghan children?
Ma'am, on this current tour, I have not had any reports. I don't remember any specifically from 2010, 2011. I can go back and try to look at records for that. Again, I can't stress enough that this is about discipline. This is about discipline of our men and women, understanding what right and wrong is, about treating people with dignity and respect. And, you know, as I said, even the Afghans, President Ghani all the way down, understand how important this is. And they have reiterated to me that this is serious and that if he knows of people that violate this, that conduct this criminal activity, they will be prosecuted. We have reiterated to our men and women, again, that if you see this, you have to report this. And so what you're referring to, again, is 2010, 2011, maybe 2012 reports. I think a lot has happened in that time frame. I can't comment on a particular company level, battalion level unit that within that unit that the members of that unit felt that it was okay to do some of that. I can't comment on that. I don't know that, but.
General, do you know of any instances where an Afghan soldier was held accountable or an Afghan leader and any disciplinary actions on their behalf?
I know that I've seen some disciplinary actions over the last year in gross violation of human rights when it's come to abusing of soldiers, abusing of other members in the command. I have not seen it with the sexual assault of children, though, in the last 14 months.
Okay, thank you. I think it's important that we stress not only is it unacceptable amongst our own ranks, but also those that we are serving with from that region. So thank you for that. Going back also to capabilities and conditions, I'm glad we look at that rather than the time frame. If we look at keeping 10,000 troops on ground in Afghanistan, if there's a decision point where we keep 5,000 troops on ground or 0 troops on ground, is there any way that you can just broadly describe the conditions that must exist on the ground before we get to those points? You know, do we leave it the same as we have now at 10,000, or at what point could we get down to 5,000 and so forth? Just very broadly. Thank you.
Again, ma'am, I think based on what's happened since the President made his decision in 2014 to go down to 1,000 around the embassy, we've taken a look at all the conditions, and based on those, I've provided options to take a look at the mission sets that we want to do in the future. I believe we still have to do train, advise, and assist at certain levels for aviation, for logistics, for intelligence, for special operating forces. I believe that we have to have a counterterrorism capability, and you need a certain amount of forces to be able to do that. And so those are based on what's happened the last couple of years and as we look to the future. And so conditions on the ground have changed since 2014. I'm appreciative that the senior leadership, both the Joint Staff OSD and I believe the White House, are looking at these options, understanding that conditions on the ground have changed, and we have to look at the pros and cons of this and move forward.
And thank you. My time has expired, but I do want to thank you for your valuable, no BS assessment of what's going on over there. We truly do need that. So thank you, General. I appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Blumenthal.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, General, for your extraordinary service to our nation, and particularly in your present role. I have a question about Daesh, as I think you've referred to it, as interacting with the Taliban and with other factional parts of our opponents there. How real a threat do you regard Daesh as being compared to the Taliban, and could any sort of negotiated solution involving the Taliban also involve those other factions, including Daesh?
So again, I think Daesh, ISIL, Khorasan Province, ISIL KP, different names for it. Everybody's looking at this to make sure that it cannot grow, it cannot build to a level to do something like you've seen in Iraq and Syria. Daesh and Taliban have different philosophies. They are fighting each other. I do believe that within the ranks of the Taliban that there are reconcilables that understand that the only way to end this is a political solution, and they want to be part of that inside of Afghanistan. Inside of the Taliban, there will be a certain amount, I've heard upwards of 20 to 30% that are irreconcilable, Haqqani probably being one. I do not believe, from what I know of Daesh, that they are in the reconcilable branch. They would be irreconcilable, I would believe at this point in time.
Are you satisfied with the efforts that have been made toward reconciliation and negotiation so far?
So I'm not satisfied because we haven't got to it. So I mean, I think there's a lot more that can be done by both Afghanistan and Pakistan and the Taliban, quite frankly. So yeah, I'm not satisfied. We got to continue to move toward a peace process. The first day that President Ghani took office, in his inauguration speech, he talked about bringing in the Taliban, that you have to be part of this peace process. You can't continue to kill fellow Afghans. You can't continue to kill fellow Muslims. And so be part of the peace process. And I think he genuinely wants that to happen and is doing everything he can to try to push that, to include expending a lot of political capital on Pakistan throughout the last several months to drive them to help on reducing the violence inside of Afghanistan to drive toward reconciliation.
Is that goal of reconciliation one of the factors you considered in your recommendation as to what size and scope the American presence there should be, and over what period of time? I think Senator Graham asked you what victory would look like, what defeat would look like, but what your answers suggest is that there is some different kind of picture that it would look like.
So I think there's a lot of different audiences out there that understanding a continued presence by the coalition would have an impact on it. It'd have an impact on President Ghani. It'd have an impact on the Afghan security forces and their morale. It'd have an impact on the Afghan people. It'd make a great impact on the Taliban. It'd make an impact on Pakistan, and it'd make an impact on NATO. So I think all of those audiences, in differing levels, would have a decision to continue to have a larger number of coalition forces, not only the U.S., but the coalition would have a huge impact there.
You make reference in your testimony to two other trends that I think are concerning the brain drain and the loss of economic resources, the drain on capital. Has that increased in pace and seriousness?
Sure, there's been a lot of reports of a lot of Afghans that are trying to leave the country, as a lot of the countries in that area, the refugee issues that are going into Europe. So, and a lot of those are Afghans that are trying to leave. Both President Ghani and Dr. Abdullah have reached out to the younger generation, asking them to stay, to continue to work in Afghanistan. And so there has been, for lack of a better term, a drain on the human capital piece here that I know they want to keep in. The future of Afghanistan is two things, I believe. It's the Afghan security forces, and then it is this younger generation of Afghans that are tired of 35, 40 plus years of war.
And one can hardly blame them, given the impact on their futures, economic and social and family. And so longer term, the success of Afghanistan as a country is really dependent on the political factors and the social and economic factors that are hopefully supported and promoted by the American presence there as well. Thank you very much, General. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Sessions.
Thank you. Well, this is a very serious time for us. And I would say that in Senator Blumenthal's good remarks, I would note that it's also, in the situation we're in Afghanistan, a military situation also that can impact the outcome. And without it, it will impact the outcome. Is that correct, General?
Sure, you're talking about the Afghan security forces?
Well, I'm talking about our presence and Afghan presence. There's some battles to be fought. Military conflict is involved and is going to continue to be involved for some time, is it not?
Sure, Afghanistan will continue to be a very dangerous place, and the Afghan security forces will continue to be challenged in many areas. Yes, sir.
Well, the President has said he'd like to negotiate with the Taliban, and that has been attempted for a number of years today. Does it make it hard? Is it harder or easier to negotiate with the Taliban a reasonable solution and a peaceful solution to Iraq if we made it absolutely clear we have an irrevocable commitment to leave on a certain date?
Sure, the reconciliation piece, again, will be Afghan-led by the Afghan government, but you absolutely want to operate from a position of strength as you do that. Yes, sir.
And I know it's a difficult question for you, but I would just translate that to say you need to have a military strength, and if there's not there, it gives confidence to the Taliban to believe if they wait us out, then they can be successful militarily. And even though the people of Afghanistan do not prefer Taliban domination, we're setting this up, I'm afraid, to allow that to happen. It's a very dicey thing. In terms of going to 1,000 troops, well, this is really not a military presence, is it? This is just simply an embassy security force, essentially.
Sir, the goal right now, or the intent, is to have a security cooperation office that would be a little bit more than just embassy force protection. It would also have the ability to provide oversight of foreign military sales, oversight of the money that will have to continue to come into Afghanistan as well.
But it's simply not, essentially not a fighting force, and it signals that we're completely out of the fight militarily, I would suggest. And I think that's a dangerous signal to be sending. So you're talking about we need to train, assist, and advise more. Do you think, is it your recommendation that that capability extend beyond the end of 2016?
So I've said that the Afghans will continue to need support in many areas that we've identified that they'll need continued help: aviation, logistics, intelligence. So yes, sir, train, advise, and assist in those areas would require a little bit longer time.
And to what extent do they have rotary aircraft, helicopter capability for evacuation of wounded or resupplying remote forces or otherwise taking the battle to the enemy? Is that remain a problem?
So their close air support capability is just starting to grow. They relied on Mi-35. They only had 5 when we started the fighting season. They're down to 2. They do have Mi-17s that provide them the ability to move wounded, to provide resupplies. They have tried to put forward-firing machine guns, rocket pods on those to give them a little bit better close air support capability. We have brought in an MD-530 little attack bird that operates in different areas of Afghanistan to give them a little bit better close air support capability, and they'll have a fixed wing capability starting at the end of this year, but into 2017, 2018 before it's really online.
Well, I'm worried about it. In your best military judgment, what additional risk are we undertaking if our goal is, as you said it is, to create a stable environment in Iraq where people can go to school and have a chance for prosperity? What risk are we incurring by setting a firm date of ending by the end of 2016?
So I think it's been mentioned many times before, maybe not in this hearing today, but that whenever you put a time on something, that always gives somebody the ability to manipulate that, whether that's the enemy, whether that's the friendly forces. And I think the options that we've provided to the senior leadership, weighing both is looking at different outcomes that we want to have based on what's changed over the last 2 years.
Well, the President of the United States has made some very unwise decisions in this regard. It is complicating the life of the people in Afghanistan and certainly making your life a lot more difficult, in my opinion. And I don't want to make a partisan argument here. I'm not saying that. We had a deep commitment to Afghanistan. We had an entire international coalition on that part. Bipartisan, this was the good war. I think it is possible to achieve the goal you stated. Do you believe it's possible?
Sir, I wouldn't be there if I didn't think it was possible.
I agree. I think to completely move out and radically reduce our presence, incredibly risk the gains our men and women have fought so hard for, and allies around the world have helped us. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your leadership, and I think we do well to listen to your advice. We should have listened in Iraq, and we need to listen in Afghanistan.
I thank you, Senator. General, as I understand it, the present plan is that there would be increased reductions beginning in January. Is that correct?
Sir, to get down to
the embassy-centric.
Yes, sir.
You'd begin those withdrawals in January.
Sir, I'd have to go back and look at the exact numbers.
Roughly.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
I mean, as we talked.
So here we are in October, and the plan now is to begin so that by 2017, we are down to a, quote, embassy-centric force. That's the present plan, right?
Sure, that is a present plan, yes, sir.
So here we're sitting here in October, and you don't know whether to begin 3 months from now a rather significant withdrawal of troops, which requires a lot of planning, a lot of logistics, a lot of assets. And here we are sitting here in October, and you have been asked to provide the White House with a, quote, series of options. Is that right?
Sure, I provided options, and in those options, I've accounted for the glide slope that I have to take to be able to get down to the required numbers there. Yes, sir.
And so and in addition, you haven't been asked for the best option, the one option that would secure Iraq succeed in a mission in the most effective and efficient fashion. Instead, you've been asked for, quote, options. Is that right? Most of us were taught to believe there's only one option for victory and success of the mission, but you've been asked for options. Dare I ask how many?
Sir, I'm not sure I've been asked for options, really. What I've done is taken a look over the last, since I've been on the ground, the last 14 months, and seen where the Afghan security forces are at in different metrics that we take a look at in order to ensure that they have the right capability.
But is there only one option to achieve the most efficient, the most effective, least in danger of further casualties option? I don't understand this. I thought that usually my study of warfare is you develop a strategy and you implement the strategy with a plan. You don't say, hey, we're going to have 5 or 6 plans here, 5 or 6 options that we're going to pursue. Most commanders-in-chief that I've ever known of have called their military people together and say, give me the best strategy that we can employ and what's necessary to achieve the goals of that strategy. Am I wrong somewhere? Am I getting something wrong?
Sir, I don't think I couldn't comment if you're getting something wrong, sir. What I would say again is that I've provided some options to take a look at the outcomes for both a train, advise, assist and a CT capability in Afghanistan post-2016.
So you have given them, quote, options, plural, right? Not what most commanders-in-chief that I've ever experienced. They give me the strategy, give me the plan, see what it takes so that we can succeed in the best and most efficient way to accomplish our goal. And we all know what a goal is a free, stable, democratic Afghanistan. Well, it's curious times, but of course those of us that make any criticism apparently don't know a lot of the things that the President of the United States knows. So I thank you, General, and you are doing as you are ordered, and I have observed firsthand your leadership in Afghanistan on several occasions, and I think it's outstanding. And obviously, I'm not complaining at you because you're playing the hand you're dealt. I just don't understand why this administration doesn't understand that if we do what is presently planned to beginning 3 months from now, that we will see the Iraq movie again. There's no doubt in anybody's mind about that. And now we see a burgeoning or embryonic ISIS. We see the Iranians providing weapons and more for the Taliban. And we just saw an attack on one of the major cities in a part of Afghanistan that we, up till now, had believed the most secure. It seems to me that would lend some urgency to action which would reverse what is clearly a deteriorating trend. And finally, General, we look forward to the results of your investigation of this terrible tragedy of the attack on the hospital. I want to emphasize, I know I speak for all of my colleagues, that we deeply regret this tragedy. We do point out from time to time about the fog of war. This hearing is adjourned.
Thank you, sir.